Stuck on an Island with a Cute Demon by Yangster on fanfiction.net, link in the description. Chapter number 1, The Nine-Tailed Fox is a Girl? Just where the heck was he? Naruto could feel the warm, grainy sand beneath him, and he could hear the sounds of the waves coming in gently a few feet to his right and birds chirping off in the distance. When he opened his eyes, he saw that the evening sun was just barely about to set. As it began the process of doing so, it colored the blue sky his favorite color, orange. He had all these clues, but it was only when he scooped up some of the sand into his hand did he realize that he was on a beach. A beach? He trailed off quietly before turning his head to look out towards the water. Where the heck am I? How the heck did he end up here? Where was he in the first place? He stayed still for several moments as he tried to figure out what happened, but he could not remember anything. The last memory he had was walking in some dense forest with his team. So, unless he somehow just teleported onto a random beach, something must have happened. He just had to figure out what. Perhaps this was just some illusion that he was under, or just a super vivid dream. He really hoped that it was the latter. Letting out a soft groan at the stiffness in his body, he slowly got up into an upright position. Patting off some of the coarse sand on the back of his head and neck, he glanced around, and tried to get a better idea of his surroundings. He was in what he would call a stereotype of islands one would find themselves in after being stranded or something. While he had not read many books in his life, he had read enough to at least know that. There were tall perennial plants that looked like shrubs with elongated and hardened stems to him. Below them were a bunch of actual shrubs, acting as some sort of low-level fence barring the wary from entering into what he was sure to be a jungle. Or a forest. Or whatever. Further back, way deeper towards the center of the island, were a whole bunch of mountains. They were incredibly tall, so much so that from where he sat, he was sure that if there were clouds in the sky, then the tops of those mountains would be obscured by them. All in all, the island he ended up on was beautiful, but it was also scary. Full of beautiful green, monolithic structures, and dangerous mystery. Alright, island? I am on some freaking island in the middle of nowhere, he began quietly, his volume getting louder with each new word that he spoke, the corners of his lips curving downwards as he continued speaking. Well, ain't this just fantastic? I'm either gonna get eaten by something or spend the rest of my life here all alone. Shut up. Monkey. Ha! Naruto let out, blinking once as he turned his head to look down at wherever that other voice came from. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw the person sleeping next to him. Orange was the first thing he noticed. She had chin-length, soothing, orange hair that looked like the sky just a bit earlier when the sun had just started to set. It was luscious and silky in appearance. Though beautiful, it was not her hair that he was focusing on. His focus was actually on those two, long, vulpine ears that came out from the sides of her head. He had seen a lot of strange things in his short life, like people with horns and tails, but he had yet to see someone with animals' ears. Just who was this girl? Pursing her lips, he leaned towards her in order to get a better look at her face. She was really cute. Like really cute. Her face was heart-shaped, with soft cheeks that trailed down a delicate jawline to a slender chin. She had a cute, dainty nose that curved ever so slightly upwards near its tip, giving her this almost bratty or snooty appearance. Below that were her lips. Soft, plump, and just wet enough that they glistened ever so slightly in the light. His first thought when he saw her was that she was cute, but now that he had a really good look at her, he would definitely call her a beauty rather than a cutie. He looked further down, but shied away when he realized that she was completely nude. What he did see. He would describe her as curvy. Short and curvy. Tanned, short, and curvy. There was so much of all of that he actually blushed. Nope. Naked girl. We all remember the last time I ended up peeping. He whispered to himself, shuddering slightly as he reminded himself of that one time he ended up crashing into the woman's bath at the onsen. Averting his gaze, he went to remove his jacket. Patting away the sand on the back, he then draped it over her. While his jacket was able to cover up her chest down to her hips, he was still able to get a good look at those slender shoulders, meaty thighs, and wonderful calves of hers. Hopefully she would not get cold now. Letting out a quiet sigh, he then turned his head to watch the sun set. Well, I guess I'll have someone here to talk to at least, he said softly, being intentionally quiet lest he wake up the girl next to him. When that someone wakes up, anyways. Looking back at the girl, he saw that she had snuggled up against his blanket in her sleep. He did not know why, but that brought a smile onto his face. He was pretty sure by now that he was not under the influence of some illusionary technique, which meant that he was going to have to survive on this island until someone came to rescue him. It would have been terrible doing that alone, but with someone else, it would be bearable. While still unsure of how he even got on this island in the first place, he figured that it did not matter anymore. The only goal he had now was survival. While he wanted to go out and explore while he still could, he knew that it would be very irresponsible to just leave this girl alone out on the beach. So against his own want for such things like some firewood, he decided to stay. After a while of waiting though, "Eesh, this is really boring," remarked Naruto, narrowing his eyes a bit as he sat there. He really did not like being alone with his thoughts. Rarely were they ever as optimistic as the outward personality he put out. That did not mean that he was not an optimistic person though. It was just that bad thoughts still managed to get inside of his head whenever he happened to be alone. Right now, those bad thoughts were about all the wonderful things he would miss out on now that he was on some island, such as delicious ramen, sleeping in a bed, and hot showers. There were also the people he was going to miss. People like Kakashi, Sakura, Choji, and Shikamaru. Tucci and Ayam too. Also Tsunade and Jiraiya. He really did have a lot of people he would miss. Even though he had only been awake for an hour or two, he found that he missed them so much that he began writing their names in the sand. It was during like his 5th or 6th time writing Kakashi that the girl beside him began to stir. Turning his head to look back down at her once again, he took note of the way her ears seemed to flutter and twitch as she woke up. That, combined with the way she scrunched up her face a bit, made her look very cute. While he had been able to get a good look at her face when she had been sleeping, he did not get a chance to see what color eyes she had. Now that she was finally waking up, well, he would get the chance to see them. When she finally opened them, he saw that they were a pretty red. As she gazed up at the sky, he parted his lips after deciding to greet her. "Well then. Rise and sure." "What? Can it, monkey?" she interrupted gruffly and groggily, swatting her hand in his direction as she woke up before yawning loudly. "I would have preferred hearing anything else besides your voice first thing after waking up." He widened his eyes quickly before slowly scooting back. "I'd recognize that condescending tone anywhere." "You'd better. I didn't spend all those damned years stuck inside your frail body just to be forgotten in an instant," she said, tossing his jacket to the side as she stood up, revealing herself to him unabashedly. "TCH. To think you placed your filthy, scratchy jacket on top of me while I slept? Disgusting?" For a moment, his mind failed so hard to come up with anything coherent that he decided to just spout out the first thing that came to him. It took him a while though. As he stood there awkwardly, she stared back, though hers was so cold that he was sure it was the reason why he was frozen at the moment. "Are you just going to keep staring at me or what? I can't believe it." "Can't believe what?" She quirked a brow. "You're a girl." Scowling, her cheeks flushed just ever so slightly against her will at his comment. Just where did this boy get off of saying such something like that to her? Her, the almighty nine-tailed fox. Letting out a low growl, she stood up and took a step towards him. Baring her fangs, she let out a snarl as he looked at him with enough fury and hate in her eyes, that if she was any more powerful, her gaze would have set him ablaze, and turned him into ash. Did it honestly take your primordial brain that long to figure it out, or were you in such disbelief that you had to say it out loud? Are you monkeys that stupid? But, no. I just didn't think that you were a girl, he stated, his voice getting louder and louder with each word that came out of his mouth. And why is that? She asked menacingly, cutting him off, clenching her fists as she stomped towards him. Girl or not, it won't matter much to you or I after I've ripped your head off. Naruto flinched. I just wasn't expecting it. I didn't think that the nine-tailed fox could go from, well, the nine-tailed fox to, well, finish your sentence, monkey, well, he trailed off as he tried to muster a bit more courage. I just wasn't expecting to see you as a naked girl. Especially a naked girl so? Well, she kicked some sand towards him with enough force that it stung quite painfully when the grains hit his chest. Goor. I told you to finish your damned sentence. Consider yourself lucky that I haven't already gutted you for wasting my time. Fine. Beautiful. There, I said it. I didn't expect you to be so beautiful, he exclaimed, closing his eyes, and turning his head to look away as he awaited his gruesome death. Except that gruesome death did not come. There was no ripping of heads or gutting of him. At least not quick enough that his curiosity did not force him to open his eyes and look back at her. Her stance had noticeably changed into one where her legs were bent inward to the point where the inner side of her knees were touching. Her overall demeanor seemed much less pompous and condescending than earlier. Her cheeks were a bit flushed, and her ears were folded downward. To think that the demon whom he had known his entire life to be a giant, village-destroying, fox could manage to pull off such a cute pose. There were actually a lot of things to think about, but those could wait. Huh? You think I'm beautiful? She asked hesitantly, pausing before saying that last word as she looked into his eyes with a doubting expression on her face. He was quick to nod his head. Definitely. Well, of course I am beautiful. I am the elegant nine-tailed fox after all, she said softly, quickly regaining her composure as she continued to look at him, her red eyes stern as they tried to see if there was any hint of deception in his words. Perhaps, since you used what you thought were your last words to compliment me, I'll let you live. For now anyways. If I were to kill you, I'd have nothing to entertain me here on this island. Consider yourself fortunate, monkey. After she finished speaking, she flashed him a toothsome grin. If he did not know who she was at that moment, he would have felt flattered to receive such an expression from such a beautiful girl instead of wary. Well, better than having my head ripped off. Most mortals would agree with you, she replied with a smirk, sticking her tongue out teasingly before turning to face the ocean. To think I somehow managed to get myself all the way out here. Perhaps I put too much power into my escape. Naruto pursed his lips before parting them hesitantly. And how did you escape? She turned her head to look at him, the slight twist of her body causing her tone back to arch just enough that a particular curve on her body was emphasized. While he was unsure of whether or not the nine-tailed fox cared for modesty, he was at least sure that the demon fox, or girl now, in front of him would strongly mind him ogling her. Still, despite the willpower he exuded to keep his eyes on hers, he could not help but glimpse downward for just a split second, which, surprisingly enough, caused her to let out an amused chuckle. Wouldn't you like to know? She flashed him a smirk. There are a lot of things that I want to know at the moment, he began tentatively, picking his words carefully lest he incur the wrath of the demon that he had just somehow managed to placate by calling her beautiful. She quirked a brow. And? Do you expect me to answer your questions, monkey? I wouldn't say I expect you to. I would just like you to, he answered, shrugging his shoulders before slowly moving over towards where his jacket had been thrown. Should you not be more concerned with your own survival rather than whatever stupid questions you might have for me? Why don't you just go ahead, and do monkey things like burn some wood for warmth or something? You might say that I have. A burning curiosity, he replied hesitantly before putting on his jacket. The look he got was not so much an amused one, but rather just a bored one. Well, what can I do in exchange for some questions? Asked Naruto. She folded her arms in front of her chest before turning to face him. Humming softly as she walked towards him, she stopped when they were just about a feet apart. At this distance, he noticed that she was actually shorter than him. About an inch perhaps. Somehow that fact had completely escaped him. Perhaps it might have been from being too terrified to think when she had threatened to rend him apart earlier. Anyways, head pats. Belly rubs also. I want both. He blinked. What? Do I have to repeat myself in order to get through that thick skull of yours, monkey? She asked, pouting annoyedly. No. I heard what you said, but I'm just a bit. Well, I was surprised. I thought you were going to ask me to make me swear some oath to you or pledge my life to you or something, replied Naruto, raising a hand to scratch the back of his head as he gave her an apologetic smile. And why would you be surprised, huh? Your life is already mine. Do you think that because I am so great that I cannot enjoy the simple pleasures of life such as head pats and belly rubs? Naruto shook his head. No. It isn't so much as me thinking as just me being surprised. Honestly. Foot massages. I have decided to have foot massages added to my list of demands. Massages in general. So, for how many questions? He asked. You know. For all of that. A 30-minute session of one of those services grants you one answer to a question you have for me, she answered, letting her arms drop back down to her side, causing him to tilt his head ever so slightly upward to avoid getting an inappropriate eyeful of her ample chest. I get to demand you ask a different question though if I do not feel like answering one presented to me. He took a second to mull over her words before shrugging his shoulders. Well, that seems like the best deal I'm going to get. It is. After a moment of silence, he spoke up. So, do you want all that now? I would be more worried about setting up shelter if I were a mortal monkey like you, she replied, glancing upward towards the moon which had risen during their conversation before looking back at up. You might be able to bear it now, but it'll just get colder and colder until you're stuck shivering against some tree like some pathetic, little mouse. He let out a soft sigh before looking towards the tree lean behind him. It's a bit too late for that now. Perhaps if you had not spent all that time ogling me in your sleep, you could have had something made by now. I didn't ogle you, he exclaimed, looking back at her, and throwing his hands up defensively. I woke up just an hour or something before you, and I covered you with my jacket. She grumbled quietly. Your stinky, filthy, and scratchy jacket. I can't imagine you smell any better, retorted Naruto immediately, flinching a bit as he realized what he just said. You did snuggle up against it? Quirking a brow, she gave him an inquisitive look. Oh? He decided to stay quiet. So you think I smell bad, huh? She asked, closing the distance with him a bit more, canting her head a bit to the side so that she can look up into his eyes. Is that what you said? Naruto swallowed quietly before slowly nodding his head. Yes. I could kill you where you stand, but that would be a waste, she said in response after a second delay, furrowing her brow as she looked up at him. Consider this another mercy, you filthy monkey. And here I thought you were going to make me smell you or something? She let out a derisive snort. You wish. Yeah, no. Naruto trailed off as a cold gust of wind blew past him, causing him to shiver. Well, I guess you were right. It is getting colder. I am always right, she replied confidently, letting out another snort, this one much more amused than the previous one. Right? I guess I'll make like the little mouse I am, and find some tree to huddle against, he said, shrugging his shoulders. Since you're naked, how come you aren't cold? Flashing him yet another smirk, she placed her hands on her hips, and puffed out her chest pridefully. In this form, I may look like one of your monkey women, but I am vastly superior to them in every single way. The cold does not bother me at all. Lucky you. Yes. Lucky me. Unlucky for you though. Instead of standing here, why don't you go ahead, and go about procuring some wood to make a fire with, she asked, leaning forward ever so slightly towards him as she spoke. He shrugged his shoulders. Would you mind helping me? What? And subject myself to hacking down trees like some monkey laborer? Naruto pursed his lips. Perhaps he could try complimenting her again? Maybe it would work like it did last time when he called her beautiful. She did have quite the prideful streak after all. Man, if this worked, it meant that he could save himself a lot of trouble down the line. Taking a breath, he then decided to go for it. You do it a lot better than I would though. Well, of course I'd do it better. I am the magnificent nine-tailed fox after all, she exclaimed, placing a hand on her chest, and tilting her head up haughtily. Taking down trees is nothing more than child's play for me. I do that just by walking around in my fox form. Why are you in this form anyways? He asked. None of your business, she answered flatly, narrowing her eyes at him. Nice try, he said inwardly to himself before saying something back to her. So, are you going to show off your magnificence or are you just going to continue standing there? Oh? You don't believe me, huh? You don't think that the fearsome nine-tailed fox can take down a tree? Just watch me, monkey. Let me show you some of my power so that you know to respect me, she said, furrowing her brow as she stomped over to the closest tree to them. The tree she chose was like 10 times taller than her and had a stump so thick that she could probably fit inside of it if it were hollowed out. Stretching her shoulders out a bit, she then turned her head back to look at him. Are you watching? She called out to him. He called back out to her. I am. You'd better be, she shouted back before giving the stump of the tree a harsh kick. Hiya. Her leg went through the stump so quickly that it seemed to have teleported from one side of it to the other. It might have been his imagination, but it seemed to him that a sudden gap between the stump and the rest of the tree had just suddenly appeared. Before the tree fell over, the nine-tailed fox picked it up and carried it back over to him. For a moment, he thought she was going to smack him upside the head with it, but instead, he watched as she somehow crushed it in her tiny, dainty hands, turning it into a bunch of campfire-sized chunks. The whole thing seemed so surreal that he had no idea what to make of it. Wow. Are you not simply amazed, monkey? She asked, the corners of her lips curved upwards into an actual smile. Even in this weak form, I have more than enough power to take apart a tree. That was pretty amazing, he said, nodding his head as he walked up, and picked up one of the pieces of wood. I'm so glad you decided to do that to a tree instead of me. Going about picking up enough wood to make himself a good fire. He set it all up between them. While he was not the one who made the fire whenever he went out on missions with his team, he had watched it been made enough to be able to do it himself. It was a good thing his team did not make him do it, since he had already pretty much forgotten nearly all the boring survival techniques taught to him in the academy. Before he started the fire though, he noticed that his fellow stranded had not said anything in a while, prompting him to look up at her. She pouted. Naruto quirked a brow. What? Walking towards him, she narrowed her eyes, and placed her hands on her hips. For saving you the trouble of having to collect wood by yourself, I think I have earned something in return. Do you want me to pat your head? He asked hesitantly. She smirked at him before dipping her head forward a bit. Oh good. And here I thought I would have to spell it out for you. To think he would end up in a crazy situation like this, stranded on an island with a beautiful, naked girl who happened to be the nine-tailed fox. Who happened to want him to pat her on the head and give her belly rubs. For just a split second he thought he was in some sort of cheesy story or something. That thought quickly faded though as he awkwardly reached out and placed his hand on her head. She let out, smiling a bit as he began patting her head. Head pats are one of the few things your monkey hands are good for. I would hope that they are at least good for something, he replied, moving his hand ever so slightly towards one of her ears so that he can begin scratching at the base of it. Her reaction was immediate. Upon just rubbing her thumb against the base of her ear, she immediately flinched, almost as if the stimulation was too much for her. Despite of crying out or squealing, she instead just bit down on her bottom lip. Oh? The ear technique? He blinked. Ear technique? Yes. So, you like it like this more? He asked as he placed a hand on both of her ears and began massaging them. Her legs actually buckled. Ah. Yes. Like that? I am so glad that I didn't kill you. I am glad that you didn't kill me too. Oh, shut up. Smartass. This really was strange. She went from cool, killer queen to whatever this was. Alright. So, how long do you want me to do this? An hour perhaps. Wait, what? An hour? I thought we agreed 30 minutes. That was for the questions, monkey. This is for helping you with the tree. Ugh. Fair enough? Of course. I am the fair nine-tailed fox after all. He rolled his eyes. Right? Chapter number 2, A Step Towards Equality. How long had it been? Not that long actually. He had only been stuck on the island for 3 days now. Those 3 days though had been rough. He had spent them building up a simple shelter made of sticks and leaves, foraging for food, finding a water source, and tending to his island buddy. See, the first 3 of those things listed were not actually that difficult to pull off. Entertaining the nine-tailed fox on the other hand was like trying to navigate a burning field while blindfolded. It seemed that no matter what he did, he would get burned. Sometimes literally. Luckily, it seemed that he still had his insane ability to heal super quickly. Honestly, he was more tired from having to keep up with her than he was with surviving. Yes, while she was cold at times, rude often, and threatened him occasionally, there was something else that bothered him. Something embarrassing. Something that he really wished was not a problem. It was her body. Specifically, the state it was in, which was naked. Technically nude. Not just that, but he was 90% sure that whenever she flaunted a specific part of her, whether it be her breasts or her rear, she was doing it on purpose. Just what the heck was he supposed to do besides force himself to look away? Luckily for him, besides the first time when she had accused him of ogling her in her sleep, she had not insulted him once for looking at her. Whether that meant she was okay with him looking or that she had not noticed, he did not know. All he did know was that her not wearing clothes was a problem. He had to do something about it. Never had he ever thought that there would be a time where his goal would be to get a girl to put clothes on instead of taking them off. Life was strange sometimes. How would he go about it though? Letting out a soft sigh, he decided that it was unlikely he was going to come up with an idea anytime soon. So instead of racking his mind over it, he decided to just enjoy himself as he bathed in one of the deeper parts of the river he found close by to the beach. The water was warm during the day, which when combined with the beautiful view of all the flowers and trees around him made bathing on the island a very pleasant experience. That was not all though. Another reason why it was so pleasant was because it was his alone time. The nine-tailed fox never came with him, choosing to bathe at other times. Besides when he was asleep and when he was bathing, most of his time was spent in her presence. It was not terrible being with her, but it was not exactly fantastic either. Sure, they were supposed to hate each other since she killed a lot of people in his village and he had her sealed inside of him for a while, but he wished that they could just be civil with each other. Heck, he would be elated if she could go 10 minutes without insulting him or calling him a monkey. Why the heck did she call him a monkey anyways? Amid all of the questions he had asked her and all the question dodging she had done on the 3 days, he had yet to ask her that. Was it a question worth asking though? Heck, he did not even know her name yet or how she had even escaped the seal. This whole giving her service only to get his questions dodged or ignored was a very one-sided agreement. He was just so fed up with her. Flopping back onto the water, he allowed for most of his body to get submerged. Looking up at the sky, he pursed his lips and closed his eyes as he tried to relax. No matter what he tried though, she seemed to always be on his mind. They were going to be on this island for a while, he figured, so would it not be for the best if he tried to befriend her? She may have done terrible, awful things, but right now, if he considered only what he had actually seen from her, he could say that she was not 100% bad. Sure, she had her cruel moments, her rude moments, and her cold ones, but there were just a few times where she was kind to him. Maybe there was hope? Perhaps if he channeled every ounce of optimism in his body, he could say yes. Still, he was not one to just give up on something without trying it out first. So, deciding that he was going to try his best to befriend her, he then got out of the river and walked over to a flat stone nearby where he had laid out his clothes. His river water-washed clothes. Using his jacket like a towel, he dried himself before putting on his shirt and his pants. Tying the jacket around his waist, he took a few steps towards the beach, but stopped when he thought up of something. Something pertaining to the whole her not wearing clothes situation and all that question dodging she did. It might work. It was worth a try at least. The worst-case scenario was that she ripped his head off, but he was sure that was not going to happen though. Continuing along the path that he had made for himself that led back to the beach, he stopped just short of walking out into view. Standing hidden behind some large shrubs, he took a moment to look over at where the nine-tailed fox was. She was standing by the water with her back towards him. Her short, orange hair flowed in the air as the gentle, ocean winds went through it, her ears did the same to a lesser degree. She looked quite elegant like that, he thought as he watched her. While he was unable to see her face, he was pretty sure that she had a calm expression. After a few seconds, she then sat down, and began drawing stuff in the sand. It was always interesting watching her mannerisms whenever he was not around. Even with her haughty, out-of-this-world personality, she had this much more human side to her. Deciding that he had watched for long enough, he stepped out from the shrubs, and cleared his throat loudly enough for her to hear him. Quickly wiping the sand clean of whatever she had written, she turned to look at him. "It was about time you came back, monkey. I was bored out of my mind waiting for you." "You were waiting for me?" he asked. "Of course. You are my source of entertainment on this island after all." Time to execute his spur-of-the-moment plan, he thought. "Aha," he let out flatly in response before walking a few steps towards her. "So, I've a question. You're going to have to service me first," she said simply, raising a hand to beckon him even closer with her finger. "Even if I give you head pats or belly rubs, it is not like you answer the questions I want answered anyways," retorted Naruto boldly, crossing his arms. She quirked an eyebrow before smirking meanly. "Oh? Did you grow a pair during your bath or something?" "Maybe I did," he replied, furrowing his brow. "I'm just sick of you taking advantage of me. If you're going to kill me, you might as well, K?" The next thing he knew, he was smashed against a tree. The blow was more surprising than anything else, knocking the wind out of him. When the brief flash of pain finally faded away, he opened his eyes. Then he widened them when he saw that the arm she was using to pin him against the tree was the one she had back when she was sealed inside of him. It was large, so much so that she had her long, clawed fingers curled around both him and the tree, and was covered in thick, fox fur. "You've forgotten your place, monkey," she stated harshly, glaring coldly as she took several steps towards him. "If I wanted to kill you, I would kill you. Since you are alive, it obviously means that I don't want to kill you. You can't seriously be keeping me alive just for head pats and belly rubs, right?" She rolled her eyes. "I can keep you alive for whatever reason I want. And what reason is that?" "None of your business. You answer every question like that," he exclaimed, narrowing his eyes at her. "How can you be the legendary nine-tailed fox if you're too afraid to answer some dumb questions from a brat?" He watched as her expression changed from a stoic one to a conflicted one. She purses her lips and casted her gaze down onto the sand as she took a moment to think. It was clear to him that what he had said had made her pensive. Hopefully this would work out for him. Hopefully she would have a change of heart. Hopefully she would not crush him to death against a tree. "I am the legendary nine-tailed fox. Nothing scares me. Absolutely nothing," she said softly after several moments, finally letting him go, and changing her arm back to match her human form. "Ask your questions, monkey." "All right," he replied, rubbing his hand against his sore collarbone. "I have a whole bunch of questions, and I haven't got all day." He grimaced. "Right? Anyways, let's start with something simple. What is your name?" "TCH. Asking the hard questions right off the bat," she snarled. "How is that a hard question?" he asked, quirking a brow, and canting his head slightly to the side. "Why do you think that I am only referenced as the nine-tailed fox in your monkey texts? My name is sacred, given out to only those who have earned it, or who I deem as my equals," she explained, placing a closed fist against her chest over her heart. "I will answer any other question. I absolutely refuse to give you my name." Naruto paused for a moment before letting out a sigh. "Fair enough. I'll ask something else then. Tell me, why do you call humans monkeys?" She blinked, seemingly confused. "Because you're all monkeys. It's as simple as that." "But how? Humans and monkeys aren't like each other at all. Think about this. Do monkeys eat bananas?" she asked. He nodded his head. "Yeah. Humans also eat bananas, meaning monkeys and humans are the same. But a lot of animals eat bananas," he retorted. She let out a groan. "Okay. Another example then. Do monkeys have hands?" "They do," replied Naruto, the corners of his lips curving ever so slightly upwards as he began to find this whole shtick amusing. "Humans also have hands, which means that monkeys and humans are the same," she said, nodding her head at her own words. "You both even got 5 fingers on each hand. There is no arguing it. Don't argue about it. All right. So, I guess I'm a monkey, he said sarcastically. She snapped her fingers and gave him an approving look. There you go. Now you're getting it. So, if I'm a monkey, doesn't that make you a monkey also since you're in that form? He asked. She immediately glared at him. Not at all, you little brat. I am vastly superior. Remember. Right. Vastly superior? He rolled his eyes. You really do lack respect for your elders, she commented with a sigh. And your superiors? That's what everyone says about me. Why are you in that form anyways? Because I feel like it, she said quietly. He hummed inwardly at her lackluster response. It was so different from the other ones that he was sure it was a lie. He decided not to comment on it for now though. Maybe later he would bring it up to her. Alright then. Anyways, I have more questions. A more serious one, he began with a shrug, slowly raising a hand to his abdomen before continuing. How did you escape the seal? You look it as if you expect some sort of deep, intricate, and complicated explanation, she replied, smirking at him as she took a few steps towards him. But how I escaped the seal was that I merely forced myself out. Yes. Anticlimactic. I know. But how? I thought the seal kept you sealed. She shrugged in response. So, you just forced yourself out? You think I spent all those years inside of you doing nothing but counting the hairs on my tails? From day one I was figuring out how to escape. It just so happened that I finally cracked the code when you were out in the forest with your monkey squad, she answered. Naruto pursed his lips. So, is that why you wouldn't tell me? Because I'd get disappointed? TCH. As if. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to, she retorted, crossing her arms. But now you do. She nodded. Yes. I have decided to answer your questions. There was a moment of silence before he spoke up again. Why are you keeping me alive? Because I want to. I really don't understand why you are looking so deep into it. I, an immortal, infinitely superior, being wishes to keep you around because killing you would be boring. You are, as I have told you numerous times, my only source of entertainment on this island. Why can't you just leave this island? He asked. She bit down on her bottom lip before letting out a huff immediately after he asked that. Gritting her teeth for a second, she then looked away from him and murmured something under her breath. Seeing her like this caused him to quirk a brow and lean towards her to hear what she was saying. When she saw him lean in, she let out a low growl and swatted her hand in his direction to stop him from getting any closer to her. I was preparing myself to answer your stupid question, she said annoyedly. I can't leave this damned island because I'm stuck here. Oh? And why is that? Well, would it have to do with your lack of tails at the moment? I see you have fox ears but no tails. Am I right? He asked, his words actually causing her to take a step back. She scowled. TCH monkey brains and their ability to make such stupidly accurate assumptions. Naruto hummed softly. So, I was right? Yes. You are right. Congratulations. Do you want a banana or something? Do you want me to get on my knees and start worshipping you just because you made a lucky guess? She asked, furrowing her brow as she stomped the rest of the distance between them. Is that what you want, monkey? He paused for a moment before responding to her. What do you want? She blinked at him. Having had her question answered with a question took her aback, especially because the question he had asked her was such an incredibly big one. What did she want? She wanted a lot of things, but for some reason, she found that not a single one of them was really worthy of being her answer to his question. Biting down on her bottom lip, she took a step back and casted her gaze down towards the sand as she took a moment to think. Eventually the silence became awkward and she forced herself to answer. I don't know. Hummed Naruto before gesturing over towards his shelter behind her. Why don't I ask you more questions over there? I want to sit down somewhere. I have some fruits I found earlier this morning. You can have some? As if I need your permission to enjoy your fruit? She rolled her eyes but followed him nonetheless when he began walking. It'd still be nice if you asked, he replied, offering her a smile as he led her into his shelter first. His shelter was a simple thing. He took pride in it though. Using a whole bunch of sturdy sticks and some of the extra-large leaves he found in the jungle, he was able to create what was essentially a hut. It was quite large, with enough room for him to stand inside of it, but only when he stood around the center. To think that it took him 6 freaking hours. Yeah, she said dismissively in response as she walked in. The first thing she did after sitting on the leaf mat he had created was reach over to the spiraling sphere-carved wooden bowl where he kept the fruit. Picking up a whole bushel of ripe longan, she immediately began peeling them and eating them. As she ate, she looked at him with a smirk on her face. She was spiting him, and he knew it. He was fine with it though. He found the whole thing quite endearing. He would not tell her that at the moment though. Wiping some sweet fruit juice off her fingers, she then parted her lips to speak to him. So, what other questions do you have for me? So, did you use all your power or something when you escaped from the seal? He asked as he sat down in front of her. I did. The process was long, milking me of my chakra bit by bit, she explained, letting out a quiet sigh as she began peeling several of the longan so that she could savor a more satisfying mouthful of the wonderfully sweet fruit later. If I had used it all up at once, I would have alerted the seal, and it would have used whatever countermeasures its creator had installed in it to cage me even harder. Is that why I still have the seal on my stomach? She nodded her head. I would assume so. So just how much chakra did you use? He asked. Will your tails grow back? A lot. And yes. They will grow back. One tail at a time. Maybe then I'll be able to get off this stinking island, she answered, nodding her head twice as she answered both of his questions. Hopefully you take me with you, he replied. She let out an amused snort. That will depend on whether you are entertaining enough to be of worth to me or not. I think I'm doing a fairly good job at that, said Naruto, smiling confidently. You haven't threatened to kill me in over an hour. I'm improving. Perhaps you are. Finished with peeling about 8 of the longan, she then put all 8 into her mouth, and spat the stones out onto another bowl after she ate the fruit off of them. How is the fruit? She shrugged. Sweet and tender. Too much work though. I much prefer apples. So, are apples your favorite fruit? He asked. They are. She nodded her head. He hummed softly. What about your favorite color? Blue. Food. Honey. Season. Spring. What is with these simple questions? I'm just trying to get to know you, he answered, reaching over to pick up a longan for himself. I might as well, right? We'll be on this island together for a while. Not many mortals do that. Get to know me, I mean, she remarked, closing her eyes briefly as she let out a sigh. They don't even get to know each other half of the time. Naruto quirked a brow. Would you like me to get to know you better? He groaned inwardly at how awkward his question was. I wouldn't mind. She trailed off as she picked up all the longan peels and placed them into the bowl containing the stones. Oh? All right then. It'll be cool getting to know the nine-tailed fox, he said, his enthusiasm showing, causing her to blush. Ask Awa. Wait. She interrupted herself and paused for a few seconds before speaking again. I lied to you earlier. That was unfitting of someone such as myself. The real reason why I am in this form is because it is my base form. The form I take when I am low on chakra. I hate it. Naruto leaned towards her. Why? Because it's so small and frail? I have not seen myself like this in a very long time. I have forgotten how weak I can be. And I feel naked without my fur. Cursed hairless monkey form. She explained, her expression going somber when she finished speaking. Swallowing quietly, he decided to be bold, and reached forward to place his hand on her shoulder. He found that her shoulder was pleasantly warmer than he had expected it to be. Her lightly tanned skin was also wonderfully soft and smoother, just like it was on every part of her body that he had touched so far. So much so that if he was not trying to comfort her, he would have paused to marvel at it and every other part of her. To his surprise, she did not pull away. He was so caught up in the moment at the implications of her allowing him to touch her without her permission that he almost forgot to say anything. Luckily, he caught himself before the situation became awkward. Look, you're not small or frail. And you're definitely not weak. You may be in this form, but you're still the legendary nine-tailed fox. TCH. Being comforted by a monkey brat, she replied, the slight smile on her face betraying the harshness of her words. To think I have already sunken this low? Naruto smiled back at her and gave her shoulder a squeeze before pulling his hand back. Well, I'm glad it worked. If it hadn't, I would have torn your arm off. He shuddered. Thank God it worked. She let out a soft chuckle. It'd be smarter to thank me instead. Right. Thank you, nine-tailed fox, he replied, reaching over to give her a good scratch right at the base of one of her ears, eliciting a soft and pleased purr from her. Yes. Thank me more. Ha! Let out Naruto, slowly pulling his hand back as her reactions got a bit too intense for him. I will give you more ear scratches later. She cooed disappointingly when he stopped scratching her. Her ears continued to twitch before she stopped them by placing her hands on them. You'd better, she said, pouting softly. I will. Don't worry, he replied reassuringly, giving her a smile. All right. So, do you have any more questions for me? Naruto nodded. I do actually. Since you feel naked, why don't you just wear clothes? Clothes? She quirked a brow. Like what you're wearing? Sure, I guess. Clothes. She trailed off slowly before pursing her lips and casting her gaze down onto the ground. If I were to wear them, I'm sure I'd have a better fashion sense than you would. He let out a snort. Prove it. Fine, she said before closing her eyes. For a second, he thought that she was going to go venture out into the jungle to create some clothes using the leaves and vines. Imagine his surprise when her body began to glow red with her demonic chakra. Several moments passed as soft shapes began to form over her. Then, when the glow subsided, she was wearing clothes. They were nice clothes too. Not like the poorly washed outfit he was wearing at all. She was wearing a sleeveless, dark blue top that stopped short of her navel, revealing her slender waist, along with a pair of white shorts that stopped at her upper thighs. Not overly tight, but not loose either. Her newly created clothes cling to her figure, emphasizing certain parts of her, mainly her curves. Damn. Was it just him or did she look sexier now that she was wearing clothes? Just the way her shorts were just tight enough that her meaty thighs bulged out ever so slightly and the way they seemed to emphasize her wide hips. He could not see her rear from where he was sitting, but he was sure that would have been great to look at too. The top she had chosen was also great. It accentuated her slender shoulders and greatly emphasized her already prominent bust. Plus, the blue looked great with the white when combined with her orange hair. Help. If he looked at her for a second longer, he was going to start drooling or something. So, he began awkwardly as he forced himself to look at her eyes. You can make clothes? She shrugged her shoulders. I can make a lot of things. It is simple chakra manipulation. How though? He asked. Perfect chakra control, she answered simply, glancing down at herself before looking back up at him. How do I look? Still beautiful? Naruto nodded his head. Yes. Definitely. Good. She smiled, her cheeks flushing as she did so. You do have a better fashion sense than me, he complimented, tugging on the hem of his shirt. Better than most, actually. Of course, she said haughtily, puffing out her chest with pride. What inspired your choice though? He asked, canting his head a bit to the side. She shrugged her shoulders. Well, that pink-haired monkey girl that you seem to like always wore sleeveless tops. I just assumed that is what is considered fashionable. The shorts. I saw a similar pair just before I was sealed inside of you. Pink-haired monkey. You mean Sakura? I didn't care enough to remember her name, she answered. Besides, pink-haired monkey is a fitting thing to call her. Naruto shook his head. I wouldn't say that. She has a good heart. She's a good person. Would you say that you're a good person? He hummed softly. I feel like. I can't say I'm a good person. I feel like only someone else can say whether I am a good person or not, he answered, shrugging his shoulders. She raised her brow. What a surprisingly wise answer. I underestimated you, monkey. That's what they all do. He smiled. She smiled back at him. Despite herself, she could not help but smile at his enthusiasm. It was contagious. So dangerously contagious. Damn this brat for being impossible to be angry around. If she was not careful, she might end up growing attached to him. Yes, well, that is why you somehow managed to survive all those encounters with superior ninjas than you, she replied. Are they really superior though if they underestimated me? Maybe not, she said in response. If they had the mind to consider you a threat, they would have kicked your ass though. You wouldn't have let them done that though. You would have helped me out some, replied Naruto. She pursed her lips. I might have. Most likely at the last moment. I would have quite liked watching you get beat up. Rude. Not now though. He quirked a brow. Oh, if anyone is going to beat you up now, it will be me, she said with a smirk. I'm going to take that as a compliment. She let out a chuckle before smiling at him. Good. Then she gave him a good punch on the arm. He immediately winced. Ouch. What was that for? For touching me without permission. It still worked out in the end. Yeah. She then looked away, blushing as she did so. Her sudden change caused him to lean towards her curiously. Thank you though. Naruto. Chapter number 3, Befriending a Demon. Had he been surprised? When she had called him by his name, he was definitely surprised. She was too. But for a second after she said it, she had not realized it. When she did though, her face went red, and she immediately excused herself. He did not chase after her. A brief glance at the conflicted expression she had was all he needed to know that she needed some time alone to mull over things. Maybe he needed some time alone as well. Just some time to collect his thoughts and process all the things she had told him. Now, the sun had set, and the moon had risen to take its place in the night sky. Naruto had long since created the fire and ate his dinner. She was currently sitting close to the water with her legs bent so that her knees were pressing against her chest. The waves would roll in gently, occasionally getting far enough that her feet would get wet. It seemed that she did not mind though, as she did not move an inch from her spot. He went about his own things while she sat alone. For several hours they had said nothing to each other. Naruto tried not to stare, but he could not stop himself from giving her the occasional worried glance. He knew she noticed because her vulpine ears would twitch ever so slightly whenever he did. She did not say anything when he did though. Whether that meant that she did not mind or did not have the mind to tell him off, he did not know. After having her open up to him so much, he found that he now preferred her company over being alone, and that he now wished to hear her voice instead of this overbearing silence. A sudden change for him for sure, but he was okay with it. They were on their ways to being friends, he thought, even if things right now looked a bit rocky. Looking back at her again, he decided that he needed an icebreaker. Something to smooth things over between the two of them. Since he now knew that her favorite fruit was apples, he decided that perhaps he should go out into the jungle to pick some for her. He had seen some in the morning when he had picked all those longans. He had ignored them though because the idea of eating exotic jungle fruit rather than apples was much more exciting to him. It seemed to him that nearly all the fruits on this island were much more potent than those back home. They were sweeter, crisper, and much juicier. Maybe the apples were the same? It was dark, but he was sure that he could do it for her. All right, he said to himself quietly before turning towards her and calling out to her. I'm going to go spend some time around the jungle. She did not say anything back to him, but she did nod. That was enough for him to know that she had at least acknowledged his words. Tying his jacket around his waist, he gave her one last look before walking into the thick jungle brush. About 15 minutes into his journey, he noticed something. It seemed to him, as he hacked at some of the obstructing foliage with his kunai, that no matter how many times he had cut paths into the jungle, he always had to do it again. It was like he was in some sacred grove that would regrow every single night as if enchanted with magic or something. He was as scared of it as he was inspired by it. Eventually all the trees melded into one, but he remained confident that he would be able to get to where he had seen the apple trees. Being from a part of the world full of dense forests helped to ease his mind as he traversed this one. Still, all that time exploring forests did absolutely nothing to prepare him for when his next step caused the ground to click. Huh, he let out, stopping immediately. Widening his eyes at the possibilities of what could have caused that click, he then quickly jumped back. He managed to do so just in time to avoid the explosion as the earth where he had stepped erupted in a flurry of dirt, rock, wood, and bits and pieces of metal. While small, the blast was potent enough to send him against a tree. A cloud of soot and other powders sprayed out also, coating parts of his face and arms with it. Ugh! Naruto groaned after a moment. What the hell was that? Scrunching up his face when the pain finally hit him, he raised a hand to clutch his bruised chest, and let out another groan. That was where he had gotten hurt the most by the explosion. Giving himself a pat down, he was happy to find out that none of the shrapnel had gotten inside of him and that nothing was broken. A clean wound would have healed well enough with his healing factor. An infected one though? Then again, his body might just end up healing the wound before any bacteria set in. He let out a relieved sigh. Phew. That could have gone a lot worse. If he had been any slower on that jump, his legs would have been blown right off. He would have ended up a double amputee. No amount of his superior healing factor was going to fix that. Getting up, he brushed off the front of his shirt, and walked over to the crater to inspect what remained of the trap. There was not much left, just some bits of metal. Just what was that? He had not noticed any chakra signatures that would have alerted him of explosive seals, so that meant that the bomb he had stepped on was purely mechanical. Was this island just filled with random explosive traps or something? If it was, just how many more would he have to worry about? To think that he would have to deal with this on a trip just to find some apple trees. He was definitely going to have to investigate all of this later. Deciding that the ground was too risky, he decided to get around by jumping from tree to tree, just like he would back in the forest surrounding Konoha. Eventually, he found the cluster of apple trees that he was looking for. Finally, gingerly sliding himself down from the branch he was on, he made sure not to walk over another explosive trap as he made his way to the apple tree closest to him. The apples were wonderfully large and marvelously crisp in his hands as he picked them. They were this reddish-pink color that was so vibrant that they glowed in the darkness like round, little red lanterns. Just looking at them was delicious, he thought just before biting into one of them. The skin was somewhat thicker than he had expected, but he thought that it worked amazingly with the actual fruit. The fruit itself was superbly sweet, slightly sour, and terrifically crunchy. If he loved them, when he did not even like apples that much, then she was going to love them too for sure. Picking about half a dozen of them, he carried them by turning his jacket into a sack. Satisfied with the number of apples he had gotten, he then rushed back to the beach. It took him a lot less time to get back to the beach than it took for him to find the apple trees, as all he had to do was find the trail he had created and follow it back. When he finally arrived back at the beach, he saw that the nine-tailed fox was still sitting by the water. Unlike before, she had her legs extended towards the water, and she was leaning back with her hands behind her on the sand to support her. It seemed that she had resigned herself to something. I heard an explosion, she said quietly when he stepped towards her, keeping her eyes on the water as she spoke. If you hadn't come back, I would have eventually looked for you. He walked up to her with the apple slung on his shoulder. Eventually, she began softly, finally turning her head to look at him. I would have gotten worried. That's a relief, he said, offering her a smile as he made his way next to her, and sat down. I was worried that you didn't care about me. She closed her eyes and furrowed her brow. Don't joke about that. Naruto widened his eyes slight in surprise. Oh, I did some thinking when you were out, she said slowly, pursing her lips as she pulled her legs back, and looked at him. What were you thinking about? About us, she answered, hesitating slightly. I have been through a lot of things during my long life, but I had yet to end up on an island with an endearing monkey brat until I met you. I had nothing to prepare me for ending up in a situation like this. He let out a quiet gasp when she called him endearing. Is that a bad thing? She shook her head. Yes. Well, no, not anymore, I guess. At first, I wanted to get away, but after the conversation we had. What changed? He asked softly. You know, I used to not be able to understand how you were able to make friends so easily. You somehow even managed to occasionally befriend your enemies. She began, changing the topic slightly, trailing off slowly to take a breath before finishing. But now I do. What do you mean? You are so bad for me. Like too many apples, you are sweet now, but you will leave me hurting in the future, she said, avoiding the question, letting out a soft sigh between a pause in her speech. Speaking of apples, I can smell them on you. Please hand me one. Naruto blinked in confusion at her words, but eventually reached into his jacket and pulled out an apple for her. Here. Thank you. She seemed very pensive. Whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, he did not know. He also did not know where she was going with what she said, but he did notice that she had asked for an apple instead of just taking one, and she had even thanked him for it. Watching her bite into the apple, he did the same with the half-finished one he was eating earlier. She ate quietly, but he could tell that she enjoyed the apple because of the way the corners of her lips curved upwards to form a smile between every single one of her bites. If he focused solely on her, he could pick up the subtle vibrations of her purring as she got close to finishing her apple. She ate a lot faster than him. By the time he was halfway done, the only thing left of her apple was its core. She waited for him to finish first before she tossed the core into the water. That was tasty, she commented, licking her fingers. There are good apples on this island? He nodded his head. Yeah. For a moment, they basked in the view in front of them. The moon was casting its silvery reflection on the water as the gentle waves ebbed and flowed onto the beach. The view was beautiful at day and at night. One could lose themselves in it easily. He found that he was looking more at her than at the ocean though. Even at night, her orange hair was just bright enough that it was able to stand out. The dark blue top she had chosen faded with the darkness her surroundings, and the white shorts she wore seemed to blend in with the white sand. This caused her face to stand out above all else. You know, if you keep looking at me like that, you might make me blush, she confessed, turning her head to look at him, flashing him a smirk as she did so. He smiled, feeling not an ounce of embarrassment for having been caught staring. I wouldn't mind. You look cute when you're blushing. She let out a snort. As if, I think you're really cute when you blush, he said, his words causing her cheeks to flush, which then prompted him to point at her face. Like that. You look really adorable? From beautiful to cute to adorable? Is that an evolution or degeneration? She asked, her blush intensifying as he lavished her with praise. He canted his head to the side. Why can't you be all three? All three then. I guess I am now the beautiful, cute, and adorable nine-tailed fox. As she spoke, the corners of her lips curved upwards more and more with each word until she eventually smiled. Naruto smiled back at her. While he liked it when she would blush or scrunch up her face whenever she patted her on the head, he liked her smile the best. So, I've a question, he began after a brief pause, causing her to quirk a brow. What was all that about? She pursed her lips. Just looking at her, Naruto knew that what had been on her mind earlier weighed quite heavily on her. So, while he waited for her to build up the nerve to answer his question, he stayed utterly silent. I have never had a friend. Naruto. She confessed eventually, hesitating as she said his name again. When I came to be, I was already mature enough to know that becoming friends with a mortal when I was immortal would only result in my own suffering. So, I never tried with them. I tried with my fellow tailed beasts, but we could never get along. I grew to hate them, so I avoided them. It is too late for me to avoid you now though. That feeling of worry when I heard that explosion cemented that notion. Against my better judgment, I seem to care for you now. His eyes widened once again at the implications of her words. Before he knew it, he was grinning like crazy, his enthusiasm springing out into his aura, causing her to smile as well despite just pouring out her feelings to him. Gosh, he really was just impossible to be sad or mad around, she thought as she looked at him. Maybe that was why she had grown to like him so much in just a few days. Are you asking me what I think you're asking me? She let out an amused snort. Making me say it, huh? For the record, please? He smirked teasingly. She raised a hand to punch his shoulder but stopped before doing so. Instead, she smiled at him. I want to be your friend, Naruto. He let out a contented sigh and smiled back at her. I'd like to be your friend also. I hope you don't expect me to give you my name yet, she replied, causing him to pout. We've been here for less than a week. I'd hate to give you my name now and then regret it later if you happen to anger me. Or disappoint me. Fair enough. I won't push you. Good. She offered a smile to him. She then licked her lips. Do you have any more of those apples with you? She asked. He let out a soft chuckle before reaching into his jacket and pulling out another apple for her. Of course. I knew you'd want more. I doubt a single apple would be able to satisfy you. Thank you, she replied, accepting the apple. You'd be right. Whole orchards are just enough to satisfy me when I am in my fox form. This lesser form though can fit less food in it. Where does that food go anyways? Asked Naruto. It's not like you go to the bathroom or anything. I don't know, she answered, shrugging her shoulders as she sunk her teeth into the apple. It just all disappears eventually. That must be convenient, he replied, watching her as she ate. She nodded her head. I imagine it is. You know. It's getting very late, he remarked, turning his head back to look up at the moon. I wonder what time it is back home. I wouldn't know. My sense of time has been completely obliterated from all the time I spent inside of seals, she said in response, letting out a quiet sigh. I miss the early days. Back when you monkeys were still weak and docile. Back when I could roam around and enjoy myself. He looked back at her. Oh, nowadays? I have to live in fear because I'm worried that some ambitious fool will seal me inside of something. She let out a low, predatory growl. I don't want any part of your stupid wars. I just want to live in peace. Every single encounter your kind has had with me, Naruto, happened because they wouldn't leave me alone. Sensing the budding of rage deep within her, Naruto pursed her lips and placed a tentative hand onto her shoulder. She tensed up at first, but then slowly she began to relax, prompting him to give her shoulder a soft squeeze. Placing her half-finished apple down onto her lap, she rolled the shoulder he had his hand on, and then turned her head to look at him. There was a vulnerability in those red eyes of hers. It made him want to protect her. Not like a sibling or a friend though. While he was unsure of what this feeling was inside of him, he knew that he had to say something. I won't let them seal you again. She let out a quiet snort. As if they would listen to a dumb brat like you? Yeah, but I appreciate the sentiment, Naruto, she said, interrupting him, offering him a warm smile as she slowly placed her hand atop his on her shoulder. She continued speaking. I really do. I can tell that you are not lying to me whenever we speak with each other. Knowing that makes everything you say more precious to me. I'm glad, he replied, returning her smile with one of his own. You know, I never thought that I'd become friends with you. Same. Her smile widened. I'm glad that I was wrong though. Maybe it is just this island. Maybe this thing we have between us will fade after we find a way out. But I am going to hold on to these memories that I have made with you for a long time, Naruto. He unknowingly began leaning closer to her. I will too. For as long as I live? You'd better, she said with a smirk. I didn't just say all that mush just for you to forget me. I'd never forget you. She let out a contented sigh. It is getting late. You're trying to hide it, but I can tell that you are tired. I imagine wandering around the forest all night looking for apples must have exhausted you. Plus, there was the bomb, he pointed out. Yes, the bomb. Humph. Grunting quietly, she then picked up her half-finished apple, and slowly stood up. We can worry about the bomb later. Right now, you need some sleep? I can stay up for a bit longer, he said in protest, standing up as well. It's not like I gotta wake up for anything. She pouted. You monkeys need your sleep, you know? You're still growing, I assume. Don't monkey offspring need at least 8 hours of sleep every night or something? They do, but I can get 8 hours of sleep anytime I want on this island. Well, I want to watch the sun rise with you, Naruto, she said softly, biting down on her bottom lip afterwards. Naruto widened his eyes. Oh, all right. I guess I can sleep now then. Hey, do you ever sleep? Not often. I haven't slept since I woke up a couple of days ago. Sleep is unnecessary for me since I'm made of nothing but chakra, she answered, shrugging her shoulders. I do enjoy taking the occasional nap though. Do you want to sleep tonight? He asked. There is more than enough room in the shelter. She took a big bite from her apple before shrugging her shoulders. I wouldn't mind. Toss the core after you're done eating, he said, prompting her to nod, before walking over towards his jungle hut. I'd hate for insects to get in. This hut is like my last bastion on this island. She let out a quiet snicker at his words. Finishing the rest of her apple, she tossed the core into the sea before skipping towards him. I'm sure with me here, insects are the least of your worries. He turned his head just in time to see her flash a smirk. I'd take you over insects any day of the week. Pshhhhhh, she let out, waving a dismissive hand at him as she walked over towards the shelter. Honest, he exclaimed. I know, Naruto. You don't need to tell me that. I can tell when you're lying to me, she replied, offering him a smile as she stepped into the shelter. This thing always looks a lot bigger from the outside. Naruto let out a snort. Yeah, well, maybe we can work on improving it in the future. This is the best I can do at the moment. I know. She flashed him another smirk. Eesh. You know, this is my first time welcoming a girl into my home to stay the night. Even if my home at the moment is a tent made of leaves and sticks. This must be quite the occasion for you then, she replied, sitting down onto the leaf mat. This is my first time spending the night with a monkey. Ah. So, I guess we're both first-timers here. She gave him a look. Huh? Anyways? This will do. Not the best surface that I have ever slept on, but I'd take this over the sand. Maybe tomorrow I can go out and find more leaves to make the floor a bit thicker, he said as he took the apples out from his jacket. I'll come with you, she replied, letting out a quiet grunt as she laid her head onto the floor. How is it? Asked Naruto as he folded his jacket to make a mediocre pillow. Hard. He held up his jacket. You could have this. It's not a pillow, but it's the only alternative I have. Lie down, Naruto. I have a better idea, she replied, prompting him to quirk a brow. Oh? Unsure of what she had planned, he decided to go along with it anyways, and lied down onto the floor with his jacket placed under his head. So, what now? While the moon had provided them with enough light that they were able to see each other's faces, within the darkness of their hut, the only things they could pick up from each other was her orange and his blonde hair. With him lying down, he could literally see nothing, meaning that he had no idea what she was doing. He heard some shuffling, along with a few quiet breaths as she made her way closer to him. Then, he felt something warm press against his stomach. His first instinct was to immediately shoot up, but he managed to hold back from doing so. Much better. She was laying her head down on his stomach. Feeling the heat from her cheek against him made him blush. So, this was your idea? He asked after a moment. She hummed in response. Kills two birds with one stone, does it not? I get a pillow and you get to say that you slept with a girl. That isn't really what that means, but alright. She blinked. Then what does it mean, Naruto? I don't think you want to know, he replied quickly. Well, I do now. Are you sure? Yes. He pursed his lips. It's just a euphemism, began Naruto, pausing for a moment as he tried to phrase his answer in a way that would not cause her to slap him. When boys say they want to sleep with a girl, it means that they want to have sex with them. He immediately closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable smack or a slap. It did not come though. Instead, his answer was met with silence. Blinking, he tilted his head forward to look down at her. With how dark it was, all he could see was the faint orange of her hair and the silhouette of her head. What he could not see was the mad blush on her cheeks as she tried her best not to squeak or squeal. Sex was not something that had really interested her, but for some reason hearing the topic from him made her feel very embarrassed. Heck, a lot of things he said made her feel embarrassed. She could list the number of people who had ever made her blush on one hand. Just one. That one being Naruto. There was also something besides embarrassment that she felt. Something that she could not put a word to or a finger on. It was like a soft, soothing heat that was building up inside of her right below where her navel was. Just what was it? It was unlikely that he would know, so she decided not to ask him. Instead, she took a deep breath, and parted her lips to give him her response. Oh. Yeah. Well then. I think I'm just going to sleep now, Naruto. Good night. He placed his head back down onto his jacket. Yeah. Good night. Sleep well. With that said, nothing else was for the night as they both soon fell asleep. Chapter number 4, Choosing to Stay. Was their relationship getting weird? Maybe just a bit. Ever since they had become friends, it seemed to him that she was getting more and more needy. It seemed this big change happened that night just few weeks ago when she had dragged him out of the shelter at the crack of dawn to watch the sun rise with her. Maybe it was because of him nearly having gotten his legs blown off by that explosive trap that he walked into, but it seemed that she never let him go anywhere alone now. From dawn until dusk, she was with him, whether it be when he went into the jungle to acquire more food or when he was on the beach. He did not mind. After all, it meant that he could have a lot more conversations with her. At first, the only time she would not accompany him would be when he bathed. Now, she would stay with him during those moments as well. For a while, she would turn her back to him while he was bathing, but now she felt comfortable enough around him to talk to him face to face during such moments. For a bit it had been awkward for him. Eventually, after all these weeks together, he had gotten used to having her company. So much so that he was no longer that embarrassed about being naked around her when he was in the river. With the water doing its part to hide his bits, he could hold a conversation with her without fear of exposing himself. Such is the conversation that he was having with her right now. "Shikaku didn't seem like that at all when I fought him," he exclaimed, causing her to let out a soft chuckle. Oh yes. Before he went totally insane, he had a deep love for flowers. "Too bad he spent most of his time in the desert," she replied, the corner of her lips curved upwards in a smirk. "I'm still surprised you managed to beat him even if he was partially sealed. Goes to show just how weak he was." He responded to her as he washed his hair. "Yeah, well, he was freaking tough to deal with. I never knew all the tailed beasts were like that. I always assumed that most of them just wanted to kill everyone. They're only like that because you monkeys wanted to kill them first." "Well, seal them first," she said in response, absent-mindedly twirling silky locks of her short, orange hair with her fingers. "When alone like this with someone they can stand being around, we are mostly civil. Not with each other though. We all hate each other for some reason. I wonder why." She shrugged her shoulders, turning her head away from him to peer at him from the corner of her eye. "It has been a very long time since we have all met up. I have already forgotten why we split up. I just know that we did. It is an irrational hatred we have between us." "How long ago did all this happen again?" he asked. "Like." She trailed off and began counting with her fingers before finally answering him. "Maybe 10,000 years ago? Something like that." He widened his eyes. "Eesh. That is? Just how old are you? I've lost count." "How do you forget how old you are?" he asked as he swam a bit closer to where the rock she was sitting on was near the basin. "You sort of just stopped caring after several thousand years," she answered, shrugging her shoulders, glancing down at him again, taking just a split second to gloss over his muscular chest and toned stomach, and lick her lips before looking up at his handsome face. "You monkeys care a lot because every year you have people to celebrate. Was it just her, or was there something about him these days?" She just could not keep her eyes off of him sometimes. Just looking at him stirred this pleasant warmth inside of her, usually in her heart, and sometimes in other parts of her. She should be worried, but it was such a nice sensation that she found herself giving in almost immediately whenever she felt it. She had only noticed it when they had first slept together in his shelter that night, it being that nurturing and primal heat that would begin to ebb and flow throughout her entire body if left unchecked. While she should be more worried, there was no harm in indulging herself a bit, right? "Well, if you have a birthday, I can celebrate it with you," he replied, offering her a smile, seemingly oblivious to her subtle leering. She smiled sadly. "I did, but I have long forgotten it along with my age. We can always just set some day for it." "The day itself does not matter so much as the meaning does," retorted Naruto, leaning back in the water with a pleasant sigh, submerging himself all the way up to his shoulders. "Would you do that for me?" she asked softly, canting her head a bit to the side as she looked into his eyes. He looked back at her and nodded. "I would. Perhaps when we get our bearings about what date it is, then we can go about setting up a day to be my birthday," she said in response, happiness filling the void left by the sadness in her earlier smile, turning it into a toothsome grin. Watching that sudden change in his expression filled him with confidence. "You look really beautiful when you smile, you know that?" Her cheeks flushed, her ears bent downwards, and her eyes widened in surprise at his sudden compliment. "Where did that come from?" "I just felt like that I had to say it." He smiled. "You and your impulses?" she said quietly, pursing her lips as she began to feel the heat from her own blush on her cheeks. "Now you have me blushing again. Is that what you are into, Naruto? Making legendary tailed beasts blush?" He let out a chuckle. "Only when it's you." His words caused her blush to intensify. "You're just laying it on thick now." "Only because I know you like the praise," he replied, pointing a casual finger at her. "That I do," she said in response as she reached both hands up to her face to cover up her cheeks. "But, She gave her head a slight shake. "I like the praise, but I don't like blushing." "It is embarrassing?" "Why?" asked Naruto, quirking a brow. "Well, it is unbefitting of a tailed beast to be so easily swayed emotionally by a mortal," she answered, rubbing her cheeks in the hope that she will be able to alleviate the redness in them. "Does it matter here though?" "We're on an island alone together," he replied. Pursing her lips, she took a moment to mull over his words. What he said was true. He was not going to judge her, nor would he ever cause her such strong emotions with ill intent. Truth be told, she got even more embarrassed at the fact that it had taken this long for her to realize that. Luckily for her, he would not be able to see her blush grow an even deeper shade of red with her hands covering her cheeks. Not until she was ready anyways. You're right. It doesn't matter. It's just you and I alone on this island, she said softly, nodding her head before eventually lowering her hands, revealing her still red-tinted cheeks to him. There? He smiled at her. If it makes you feel any better, you make me blush sometimes too. Not as often as I do though. She pouted. Maybe you can try harder? She quirked a brow as her ears perked up. Oh? Is that a challenge? Just throwing that out there, he answered, smiling nervously when he saw her smirk. I think you just issued me a challenge, Naruto. I rarely ever back down from a challenge, you know. As she spoke, her tone changed from the dull one she normally used to a much more sultry one, causing him to shudder. Making you blush will be easy. Somehow, perhaps magically, his cheeks remained their tanned color despite the implication of her words. Well then. I see you have already put up your defenses, she said, letting out a deep, feminine chuckle as she slid off the smooth rock that she was sitting on, and walked closer towards the water. No matter. I have all day. And all night, if need be. He swallowed quietly. With her standing over him and because of where he was sitting, trying to look up at her face only yielded him a good eyeful of the underside of her hefty, bountiful, and incredibly shapely breasts. Held back by a tight, dark blue top, which seemed to be near skin-tight where it mattered the most, they were quite the sight to behold. Then she bent over and placed her hands on her hips, causing those wonderful breasts of her to bounce against each other right in front of his face. Naruto felt himself begin to salivate as the blood rushed from his head down to his growing erection. Pursing his lips, he lowered himself just a tad bit more into the water to hide the fact that he was positively throbbing down there at the moment. Not even the cold river water was enough to get him down with such a hot woman presenting herself to him. Hey, he let out nervously, causing her to hum inquisitively. Come on, Naruto. Just blush for me. I want to get back at you, she said softly, using a faux whiny tone. I even struck a pose and everything. He slowly waded away from her. It is not like I can blush on command or anything. Oh? Will this make you blush then? She asked innocently before she cupped both of her breasts with her hands and squeezed them together. Don't you male monkeys like this sort of thing? Women playing obscenely with their own breasts? Naruto bit down on his bottom lip as he watched her touch herself. She was going at it quite roughly as well, digging her fingers into the soft, doughy flesh of her breasts as she needed them, and squeezed them together. For a split second, he thought that he saw the faint outline of her pert nipples as they hardened underneath her thin, midriff-exposing, top. Eventually, he decided that enough was enough. Exhaling shakily through his nostrils, he forced himself to look away, and turned his cheek to her. It was then that he blushed. Aha! Gotcha, she exclaimed, pointing both of her fingers at him before puffing out her chest in pride. Why yeah, you got me, he replied, sinking himself down into the deepest part of the river, all the way until everything below his nose was submerged. Letting out a contented sigh, she then sat herself back down onto her rock. That was fun? I don't think I'll ever be able to look at you the same way now. He admitted quietly, looking over at her. Oh, that whole thing you did, began Naruto, his cheeks flushing again as his gaze went from her face to her breasts then back to her face. It was too sexy. What? I was just teasing you. It's not like you can't have you, she asked, her eyes widening slightly in realization as her cheeks flushed again. His blush slowly crept to his ears as he nodded his head. Yeah. She pursed her lips as she continued to look at him. She would not admit it to him, but a part of her swelled with pride at the idea that she was able to get him aroused just by fondling herself. This form, while weak and nowhere near as grand as her fox form, had its perks, she thought. Perks such as being small enough that she would not crush Naruto by laying her head down on his stomach or being able to experience that strange, yet oddly pleasant, feeling of him being taller than her. Now that she thought about it, she actually quite liked being in this form. Being able to stand with him almost as if he was her equal was nice. He had instilled confidence in her for this form that she had never had before. Especially now that she knew that she had such an effect on him. Do you need some time alone? She asked, unsure of what to say, swallowing quietly as she slowly looked down from his face to where his groin would be under the water. Truth be told, she was now kind of curious as to just what he was hiding from her. There were moments where she had wondered before, but now that the topic had taken such a turn, she found that she could not keep her mind off of it. Just the idea filled her with this hazy warmth that flooded her head with this naughty fog. She was so confused now with all these emotions, some that formed in her heart, and others that formed in places such as the spot beneath her navel and her special place between her legs. Just what was happening to her? He shook his head slowly. I think that, if you just give me a few minutes, it'll go down. We can head back to the beach afterwards. Sure, she stammered, placing her hands in her lap. Sorry, Naruto. Maybe I went too far. No. It's not your fault, he replied, gesturing no with his hand. It was just playful teasing. Plus, I'm a guy. It happens. Does it? Does it hurt? Do you really want to know? She swallowed quietly, pausing for a moment before answering his question. I'm curious. Kind of, he said quietly. Do you need help? She asked meekly, her face going red. Naruto widened his eyes. I think I can handle myself, he said, pausing for a moment to exhale slowly to calm himself down before continuing. You don't need to help. If you want, you can head back to the beach first. She shook her head and pouted. No. I want to stay with you. Oh. All right, replied Naruto, biting down on his bottom lip again. A moment of silence passed before he spoke up again. You know, I never expected you to be able to do that. I didn't expect myself to be able to do that either. It just came out. As she spoke, her two ears slowly began to droop. He slowly waded back towards her. Still, that was really impressive. Maybe if we manage to get back, you could try blending in by being an actor. Blending in. Trailing off, she looked at him, pursing her lips when she saw the toothsome grin on his face. If we ever do get back, I'll most likely just go back to roaming the wilds. I'll make sure to visit you though. I gotta know how my favorite monkey in the world is doing. That'd be really nice, he said, his elation at being called her favorite evident in the enthusiastic tone he used. You might find yourself getting more attention in that form than in your fox form though. How so? Well, you're beautiful when you're in that form. Cute and adorable too. Plus, you've got a really sexy side that I never knew existed, he answered, his words eliciting a quiet gasp from her, and causing her to blush. A lot of guys and even some girls would be very interested in you. Oh? Right. He quirked a brow. What's wrong? The only monkey I want giving me their attention is you, Naruto, she confessed, her blush intensifying. Just the idea of someone else looking at me like the way you do makes me sick to my stomach. It makes me very happy to hear that, he admitted, smiling softly at her. It'd better. You should be honored that I hold you so high compared to your fellow monkeys. His smile widened. I am honored just being able to spend time with you. Smiling back at him, she then looked down at the water. Pursing her lips, she took a moment to think over what they had said to each other so far. Such pauses in their conversation had become a thing for them. They were natural and did not at all make them feel awkward. These comfortable moments of silence spoke volumes of just how accustomed to each other they had become. As she mulled over things, she heard him start making his way to where she was sitting. Hey, you mind tossing me my jacket? He asked as he reached out to her. I think I've bathed enough. Not at all, she replied, picking up the orange jacket which she had once hated and now found somewhat endearing before offering it to him. Thanks. Covering himself as he got out of the water, he walked several steps back behind her, and began drying himself off. Quickly finishing up with that, he then walked over to where she was sitting, and picked up his clothes. It was just when he was about to tie his wet jacket around his waist when he felt her tug on the back of his shirt, prompting him to turn his head to look at her. She had her head down and was avoiding his gaze. Hey, Naruto. Yes, he asked, canting his head slightly. I don't want to go back. He quirked a brow. Oh, I don't want to go back. Here, I feel safe. Here, I get to be here with you, with someone who I can trust. She looked at him. Do you want to go back? Naruto pursed his lips as he looked into her eyes. Those red eyes which could hold so many emotions, which could grow fiery with rage and dull with somber sadness. There was a vulnerability in them that he easily recognized now. Having been asked that, he took a moment to think. Just when was the last time that he had thought of his friends back home or of his home itself? There was security here, which was the strongest reason for her wanting to stay on this island, he thought. His reasons for staying though? Her happiness. This was no tailed beast in front of her, but just a girl with unfair circumstances forced upon her. He was young and impulsive, he would admit, but he knew that if he was making the wrong decision here, then he would not have felt as much conviction as he did when he finally parted his lips to offer her his answer. Even if he had wanted to leave, just one look at her would have been enough to make him stay. This was his life now, spending every day and night with her on this island. No. I want to stay with you. She hugged him immediately after he said that. He hugged her back. While there were no words exchanged between them after that, something had changed. He knew. She knew. There was no going back. Chapter number 5, this little thing called love. Things were really shaping up between the two of them. Every morning, at the crack of dawn, the two of them would climb up to one of the taller trees in the jungle to watch the sun rise. They would sit right next to each other on one of the thicker branches with her resting her head on his shoulder as they took in the vibrant orange and red as the sun rose up from behind the water on the horizon. Afterwards, as they talked, they would be able to turn and savor the view of the endless greenery behind them. The island stretched out for as far as the eye could see and then some. It was filled with tall trees with beautiful flowers sprouting out of them and a sprawling mountain range. Being able to see those two grand views back to back was truly an awe-inspiring way to start the day. Despite the island's supreme vastness, he had barely explored any of it. While there was much to be found or discovered, he was content with just spending time with her at the three places that he had pretty much made part of his new home: the beach, the place with the apple and longan trees, and the part of the river where they would bathe. All that was just a fraction of the massive island that they were on, but for him, it was pretty much his entire world. Her too, of course. She was her friend and the only other person on this island with him after all. However, the word friend was starting to seem unfitting for someone such as her. It did not feel right to call someone who was so close to him just a friend. This was especially the case after he had promised to stay with her on the island even if they found a way off of it. There was without a doubt something special between them. Something potentially life-changing. He just did not have the confidence to acknowledge what it was. At least not yet. Even if things did not escalate any further though, he was more than happy to just be with her. There were so many aspects of their relationship that he had never really experienced with anyone else. There would be moments where they would tease each other, moments where they would talk about more serious topics, even moments like this, a quiet one. The sun had just risen to its place in the sky and was now blanketing their backs with its warmth as they looked out towards the jungle. Today was just a bit different though. While she did have her head on his shoulder, she had taken the bold move of wrapping herself around his arm as well. Her boldness was rewarded when he had rested his head atop hers in turn. Neither of them had also said a word yet. Not that it bothered them. Even when they had nothing to say to each other, they were able to smile and bask in each other's company. With each passing day, they became more and more comfortable with each other. While these touches that they shared spoke volumes of their growing connection with each other, they themselves were silent, always avoiding the topic one way or another. Eventually that silence would have to come to an end. It was just a matter of time. Letting out a soft sigh, Naruto decided that he would be the first one to talk. "I don't think I'll ever get tired of waking up to this. The view is nice," she replied, canting her head to look up at him. He hummed in agreement before looking down at her and smirking. "Though I'd say that the view next to me is even nicer." Her cheeks flushed just like he wanted them to. "You and your silver tongue. If you had been this smooth before we ended up on this island, you could have had a girlfriend back in your village." Mulling over her words for a moment, he tried to think back to the girls that he had known when he lived in Konoha. Strangely enough, he found that he did not really care enough to imagine what dating any of them would have been like. Perhaps isolation had something to do with it, but the only girl he had on his mind was the one right next to him. "Maybe." He shrugged. "It's not like I can go back in time to see if you're right." "True." He quirked a brow when she trailed off. Speaking of time, I wonder how long we have been here on the island, Naruto," she said quietly. "About a month," replied Naruto with a shrug. "Why do you ask?" "It doesn't feel like a month has passed at all," she answered, exhaling softly, the corners of her lips curving upwards to form a soft smile. "Does it?" "No. Not at all." He smiled back at her. "What was that saying again?" "Time passes quickly when you are having fun." Naruto nodded. "Yeah. That's the one." She let out a soft chuckle before flashing him a smirk. "Every day is fun with you, Naruto," she began, giving his arm a squeeze before turning her gaze back onto the jungle, prompting him to do the same after a few seconds. "I can honestly say that waking up every morning with you snoring next to me brings a smile onto my face." Hearing her say that made him smile. He knew just how much of a slob he was when he woke up in the morning, so having her tell him that she actually found that side of him endearing meant a lot to him. He had to say something back to her, he thought, to show her that he felt the same. He stopped himself as he took a moment longer to think up a response. "I used to hate waking up, you know? I hated it the first few times you dragged me up here, but now, well, I look forward to the mornings now. I look forward to sitting here with you and watching the sun rise. It seems that we have both had the same effect on each other," she pointed out. "I used to hate waking up as well. When I had told you that I wanted to watch the sun rise with you, that was just a spur-of-the-moment thing I threw out." He let out a soft chuckle. "Being impulsive has its positives, It does?" With nothing else that they wanted to say, they both shared a pleasant moment of silence. It was her that broke it this time. "I have been doing some more thinking these past few days." "Oh? He looked back at her and quirked a brow. She looked back at him as well and nodded. Yeah. Do you want to share? She nodded once more. I do. Then go ahead. He smiled, causing her to smile back. Okay, she said quietly to herself, taking a deep breath before speaking. So, during this past month, I have opened up to you more than I have ever to anyone. You have seen sides of me no one else has. And instead of judging me, you accepted me, and made me feel good about the parts of me that I once looked at with disdain. Sorry if this seems too serious to be part of a morning conversation. It's not, he replied, offering her a reassuring smile. If it is important to you to say it, then it is important for me to listen. You're so sweet. She trailed off as a subtle blush made its way onto her cheeks. I feel really lucky to have you all to myself, Naruto. Well, I am the only other person on this island, he said teasingly, eliciting an amused snort from her. Yeah, well, trailing off once again, she cleared her throat quietly before speaking. Anyways, I wanted to say that you've helped me deal with things that I did not think even needed dealing with. You have made me see myself in a whole new light, she began, her own words causing her to smile and for him to smile in kind. I used to hate this form. I thought it was weak, frail, and unsightly. Hearing all your praise for it has instilled in me a confidence for it that I never had before. Now I think this form is beautiful, cute, and adorable. I want to thank you for that. While what she said was true, she left out that the biggest reason why she now liked this form so much, because he liked it. I'm very glad to hear that, he replied, reaching up to give her soft scratch behind one of her ears. She let out a quiet purr before chuckling. I bet you are. It is not every day that one has the most powerful tailed beast say something that heartfelt. You've made my entire day just telling me that, said Naruto, grinning happily at her. Yes, well, I hope that what I will say next will make your entire week, she replied slowly, pursing her lips for a moment before saying his name. Naruto. He took a quiet breath. Yes. After all you have done for me. Well, truth be told, I do not even know why I waited this long to tell you. Perhaps I just wanted to wait for the right moment, she began, her words prompting him to quirk a brow. But I think that you are my equal. I have been thinking that for a while now. You may not be as strong as me or as venerable, but you are powerful in your own way. You have proven yourself to me. His eyes widened slowly as he realized what she meant. Does that mean you are going to be telling me your name? Yes. She smiled sweetly at him. You've earned it. Blushing at the intense look he was giving her, it took her a second to recover before she was finally able to tell him. It's Kumiko. That's my name, Naruto. He found it fitting that her name contained the word 9 in it since she was the nine-tailed fox. Her name was quite long, which made sense since she was from an ancient time. He had nothing to complain about though. He was utterly elated that she now trusted him enough to tell him her name. Kumiko. He whispered her name back to her as if she was some sort of god, or goddess in this case. Her blush deepened when she heard him say her name. I'm so happy to be able to hear you say my name, Naruto. I just knew that it would feel right hearing you say it. Having heard her name, he wanted to push things a bit further while she was still in this happy mood of hers. Can I call you Kumi? He asked, canting his head a bit to the side. She blinked. What? What? Kumi, repeated Naruto. It is a cute shortening of your name, don't you think? Not even a minute and you already want to shorten it? She asked, her tone incredulous. Is Kumiko that long? Naruto shook his head. No. It's not because your name is too long. I just find that. Well, since we're so close to each other, wouldn't it be alright to call you by a nickname? Kumiko pursed her lips as she took a moment to think. I guess we are close enough that I can stand you shortening my name. I really hope you do not expect me to start calling you Neru though. I think Neru sounds ridiculous. It does? He nodded. Then alright? I guess Kumi isn't that bad. You did say that it was cute? Trailing off, she then buried her face into his arm as her cheeks flushed. Damn it, Naruto. Only you. I swear that it is only you that can make me feel like this. If anyone else had did what you just did, I would have ripped them in half. God himself could come down and call me by that, and I would still try to kill him. Does that mean I'm special, Kumi? He asked, nudging her gently with his elbow, causing her to look back up at him. Kumiko swallowed quietly. I guess it does. How special? Special enough. She answered quietly, pursing her lips. Why are you asking? Because I think that there is something I should say as well, said Naruto, his tone serious, as he slowly turned to face her. She blushed when she saw the intense look on his face. Well, like you said, if you have something to say, then I have something to listen to, Naruto. I hope that I'm not making you uncomfortable or anything, he replied, his gaze softening slightly. Not at all. Even now, I find you more comfortable to be with than anyone else that I have encountered, she said reassuringly in response, leaning forward to place one of her hands on his lap. So please, Naruto, if you have something to tell me, please tell me. Sorry if comes out all jumbled. Kyumi offered him a calming smile. I'm sure that I'll be able to decipher the meaning behind whatever have to say. All right, he murmured before taking a deep breath. We've been friends for a little while now, but these past few days, I feel like we've become something more. What do you mean? She asked, pursing her lips. Well, remember that first time we met, when my teacher had kicked me off that cliff to try and get me to summon a giant toad? She nodded before letting out a soft chuckle. I do. Heh. I can still remember what you were like. You were such a runt. The perfect stereotype of a monkey brat. I was a lot louder back then. Plus, I'm pretty sure the first thing I asked you was if you were willing to give me some of your power, he replied, smiling fondly at the memory, to which she smiled back. You made such a funny face when I outright said no. She let out a contented sigh. It was always fun teasing you. It was the only source of entertainment I had in that cursed seal. I bet it was. Younger me might not have appreciated it, but I find it funny now that I'm looking back on it. Kyumi let out an amused snort. Younger you would have had his head ripped off. Thankfully it all worked out in the end, exclaimed Naruto with a smile, letting out a slightly nervous chuckle at her mentioning of his head being ripped off, his exaggerated reaction eliciting a soft giggle from her. Yes, it did. I'm still unsure how that happened, she replied with a snort. I think that is part of what I'm trying to say, Kyumi. We may have hated each other back then, but being on this island with just each other has brought us a lot closer together, he began, prompting her to quirk a brow. The first thing you said to me when we got on this island was that I was a stupid monkey. Now, we sit here every morning with your head on my shoulder as we watch the sun rise. I don't know how it happened, but you're the closest person that I have now. You are too, Naruto? I don't think I have cared for anyone more in my entire life, she confessed, her cheeks flushing. You're so kind, so humble, so sweet. I could not ask for a better person to spend time with on this island. Part of me wishes that the entire world could know just how you really are. They would be able to see that they were the ones in the wrong all this time, he began, pausing for a moment before shaking his head. But, I'm selfish, Kyumi. I'd be jealous if anyone else knew. I want to keep this side of you all to myself. I want you all to myself. She parted her lips, but the only thing she could say was his name. Naruto. I don't think there are words to describe how I feel about you, Kyumi, said Naruto, reaching forward, and placing both of his hands on her shoulders. The more time I spend with you, the closer you get, but it still feels like you're far away somehow. Naruto, she said his name again, blushing when she felt his strong hands on her slender shoulders, before slowly leaning forward to place both of her hands on his cheeks, causing him to blush in kind. I think that there are words to describe how you feel. How we both feel. He widened his eyes. Kyumi. Now it was his turn to be left speechless. I hadn't expected things to move this quickly. I had planned to just open up to you a bit more today by telling you my name, she began, rubbing her thumbs along his whiskers. I thought that it would take much longer for it to come to this. I would have prepared more, but... She trailed off and turned her gaze downward, hesitating slightly as her will faltered. All it took to bolster it though was him giving both of her shoulders a soft, reassuring squeeze. Feeling confident once again, she then looked back into his eyes, and smiled. I guess there is no preparing for things like this. Especially not when it's you, Naruto. He swallowed quietly. Kyumi. You don't have to if you want to wait. No. I need you to know now, Naruto. Trailing off, she leaned closer and closer towards him until there was just an inch of space between their lips. As she moved closer to him, he had slid his hands past his shoulders, and wrapped his arms around her upper back while she had lifted herself onto his lap. With them so close to each other now, they could both feel the other's warm breath against them and take in the other's scent. He found that she smelled sweet like honey with just a hint of smoke, while she was happy to discover that up close, he smelled of the woods. While nothing was said for a few moments, neither of them needed the other to say it to know how the other felt as they gazed lovingly into each other's eyes. She still said it anyways. I love you, Naruto. As did he. I love you too, Kyumi. Licking her lips, she glanced down at his before looking back up into his eyes. This is the part where you kiss me, right? Letting out an amused snort, Naruto flashed her a toothsome grin before gently placing one of her hands on the back of her head and pressing their lips together. They both closed their eyes just before finally kissed. Her lips were soft and plump, perhaps more so than her breasts as he pressed himself against both, and the way she held his cheeks encouraged him to kiss her even more fervently. Neither of them had ever kissed someone for real before, but where there was a lack of skill, passion and love was quick to fill it. Even if their kiss was not, this moment was perfect for them both. As things got a bit more heated, his growing confidence spurred him on to begin running his fingers through her hair and moving his other hand down to her exposed lower back. When he brushed past one of her ears, she moaned softly against his lips, causing both to blush. Her having made such a cute sound seemed to encourage the both of them, causing them to channel even more of themselves into the kiss, to the point where things began to get hot and heavy. They continued expressing their love through this kiss until they were both left breathless. When they finally parted, a slight trail of their saliva remained connected to both of their lips, causing both of their blushes to deepen. Naruto was the first to recover. "Kyumi." She let out a quiet pant as she looked into his eyes. "I never knew that a kiss could be like that." "Yeah," he said breathily. "I'm glad that it was you I fell in love with, Naruto." The corners of her lips curved upwards to form a warm smile. Naruto smiled back at her. "I love you too, Kyumi. Ga. I wish you'd use my full name when you said that." He let out a soft chuckle. "I love you, Kumiko." She blushed. "I love you too, Naruto." Chapter number 6, Pushing the Boundaries. Things had escalated a bit. Just a bit. From just one kiss, a whole myriad of different loving acts between them had opened up to them. Neither of them was really ready for the deep end of all of that though, but the temptation to just jump right in was definitely there. It seemed that they were both determined to push the boundaries to their absolute limits with the things that they would do to each other now. All it would take to spur either of them on would just be the slightest of touches or the most subtle of looks from the other. The only thing that stopped them from going all the way was this sense of hopeless romanticism within both of them that demanded that they each spend some amount of time together at each stage before moving on to the next one. Not that there was anything wrong with that. It was kind of like not having sex until marriage or something like that. They would take that step forward together when they were both ready. Right now, however. And Naruto. Her cute-sounding squeal only encouraged him to splash her even more as the two of them played with each other in the river. Both of them were nude at the moment and were showing the other themselves in their entirety, not that they minded. His clothes were tossed messily together on the smooth rock that Kumiko used to sit on while she had simply vanished hers away. They had been in the river for half an hour now. While they had been there just to bathe, things ramped up when she had splashed him playfully. Seeing opportunity to have a bit of fun with his girlfriend, he had splashed her back. Now, they were having a mini water war with each other. "Take that," he exclaimed, splashing her again, this time managing to get her right in the face. She squeaked before splashing back blindly. "Oh, you're going to get it now. Am I?" He smirked as he dodged. "You're too good at this, Naruto." Kumiko squealed once more as he splashed her again. Her praise filled him with pride. It was to his detriment though, as overconfidence left him with an opening that she was quick to exploit. "Wah," he let out, scrunching his face up as water from the jet she sent his way got into his eye. "Aha! Gotcha." Kumiko was unrelenting once she had gotten the advantage. She splashed him over and over again, making sure to not use all of her strength lest she hit him so hard that he falls right over. Still, because of her unwillingness to utterly annihilate him in this splash battle, he was able to slowly make his way over to her despite her overwhelming him with several torrents of cold, river water. "I'm going to get you." Naruto began trying to grab her, his voice distorted from all the water hitting him, causing her to let out a giggle. She began backing away from him, splashing him also. "You can try. It'd be easier if you didn't keep splashing me. Face the challenge, Naruto. Don't run away," says the one running away. "Only because you're trying to catch me. When I catch you..." He was interrupted when she sent a splash right to his face. "What are you going to do, So focused on teasing him, she was completely unaware as the subtle sounds of moving water came from behind her. It was only when it was too late that she realized what was happening. Feeling a set of powerful arms snake underneath hers, she felt the hands of her captor clasped behind her head, effectively locking her upper body in place. In such a position with her arms forced outward, her large, bountiful and fat breasts were on full display to him. Droplets of water rolled down from them, reflecting some of the sunlight as it trailed down her body, past her navel, before joining back with the river. "Shadow clone, baby. That's what I'm gonna do," exclaimed Naruto, grinning victoriously at her as water dripped from his drenched blonde hair and face. "See, cheater." She huffed quietly before she tried to squirm her way free. Now of course she could just effortlessly break free, but where was the fun in that? Kumiko really liked these moments where she could put on an act of being as weak as her current form made her look. She would never admit it to him, but it aroused her quite a bit whenever she placed herself into these situations where she could get all submissive. Putting up a faux struggle, she awaited anxiously for what he was going to do to her now that she was at his mercy. "Can you really call it cheating if you know that I can use shadow clones?" he asked, offering her a smile as he slowly made his way towards her. "You're a ninja. You should embrace being called a cheater," retorted Kumiko, sticking her tongue out at him. He hummed softly. I never thought about it that way. Duh. You're not much of a thinker, Naruto, she said, the corner of her lips curving upwards to form a smirk. Good thing you have me to balance that out though. Yeah, he replied, his smile not faltering for a second. Good thing I have you, Kumi. She bit down on her bottom lip, her cheeks flushing just slightly at his genuine response. She had been expecting a retort, but hearing that from him was nice too. It had actually made her really happy to hear him say that. So much so that for a moment, she forgot about her lewd plans to get him to play with her. When she did remember though, she did not hesitate to resume it by bringing up the rather provocative position that she was still in. So, Naruto, now that you have me like this, what are you going to do to me? She asked innocently, her blush deepening as his gaze temporarily went to her breasts before returning to her face. I honestly thought you were just going to destroy the clone, he answered, closing the distance between them with just a few steps. Naruto pursed his lips and continued humming before cupping both of her breasts, causing her to let out a soft squeak and for her ears to bend downwards. They're really big and heavy. Your breasts, I mean. Is that a bad thing? She let out a heated breath as her cheeks began to flush. He shook his head. Not at all. Trailing off, he glanced over at his shadow clone before desummoning it. If you want me to stop, Kumi? No. Please continue, Naruto, she said softly, squeezing her breasts together with her forearms and clasping her hands atop of them now that her arms were no longer being held back. We are a couple now. Touches like this are normal. He slowly nodded before he gave both of her breasts a tentative squeeze. They were soft just like always, he thought, so much so that with just a slight bit of pressure, his fingers would effortlessly sink into them. Emboldened by this wonderfully soft feeling, he moved his hands so that her nipples were pressing up against his palms and gave her another squeeze, this time much more firmly. While she did not make any noise, only letting out a quick breath, he felt her nipples harden underneath his hands. Looking up at her, he saw that the slight haze of arousal had already set in her eyes, and that her cheeks were starting to flush again. Your breasts are perfect, whispered Naruto before he moved his hands again so that his thumbs were pressing against her nipples. Are they really? Naruto offered her a smile. They are so soft. It feels amazing squeezing them. My fingers just sink into them and they fit in my hands just right. That's not surprising though, since every part of you is perfect, Kumi. I don't know what feels better. Your praise or your hands? She trailed off, her blush deepening as she was overcome with embarrassment. Why compare? Just enjoy both, he said, eliciting a moan from her when he began rubbing the soft pad of his thumbs against her nipples. Why you're right, stammered Kumiko in response, letting out another soft moan as she slowly sank down into the water, causing him to sink down with her. Weak in the knees? She slowly nodded her head. Yes. Her breasts were under the water now, but that did not stop him from squeezing and kneading them. The contrast of the warmth from his hands mingling nicely with the refreshingly cool water, she realized, was really turning her on. So much so that she had to place her hands onto his shoulders for support as she tried her best not to get any louder than she already was. You know you can be as loud as you want, Kumi, he said, causing her to blush as she considered the possibility that he could read her mind. It's just the two of us? He was right. Managing to nod her head, she then closed her eyes, and leaned towards him. Parting her lips, she let herself go, and began to moan freely. While he had only played with her breasts a few times now, he had gotten very good at it in a very short amount of time. He knew where most of the spots she liked being squeezed were and had this wonderful technique that he would apply to her nipples. It drove her absolutely wild. I never thought that something so simple could feel so good. Trailing off, her bottom lip began to quiver as she let out another moan. Naruto slowly leaned closer towards her. I think there is a way to make this even better. Please. Go ahead then, she said softly, knowing already what he was going to do to her. She parted her lips just ever so slightly just before he kissed her. The feeling of her warm breath washing over his lips seemed to encourage him to try something that they had never done before, using their tongues while they kissed each other. With her already so aroused by his hands, she gave in nigh instantly when she felt his warm tongue against her own. It was such a lewd kiss. Her needy moans were muffled by his tongue and lips as he kissed her and groped her. He was only kissing her and touching her breasts, and yet she was getting so close. So desperately close that she felt as if a fire was spreading throughout her entire body from where he was touching her. It was maddening, but she loved this feeling, that powerful surge of pleasure just before her inevitable climax. Her inevitable, impending climax. Naruto. Kumiko cried out his name as she parted from the kiss. Her grip on his shoulders tightened, her thighs squeezed together, and her body flushed when she finally came. He held her up as her legs buckled, supporting her as she rode out the powerful waves of pleasure from her intense orgasm. Biting down on her plump bottom lip, she pressed against him, pushing her sensitive and swollen breasts against his chest, and wrapping her arms around his neck. Feeling his sturdy body against her own and his warmth was just what she needed as the shudders and quivers from her climax ran through her. As he held her, he began stroking her back with one of his hands, coaxing a few soft purrs and moans from her. After her breathing returned to normal, Naruto spoke up. "How was that, Kyumi? Even better than the last time?" She answered, humming a soft, pleasant note as she snuggled up against him. "Oh good," he said with a smile. She smiled back at him before leaning forward and resting her chin on his shoulder. A few moments passed before she said anything. "I can feel you poking against my thigh." "Yeah? Well," he shrugged. "It happens." Kumiko blushed. "It's so hot, Naruto. And hard?" "I'm sure the water will cool it down eventually," he replied, pursing his lips. "Why? Why can't I be the one to cool it down this time, Naruto?" she asked, slowly pulling back to look at his face. Yes, despite having already pushed this far with each other, she had yet to get a chance to reciprocate all the love that he had given her. She had wanted to make him squirm and moan too ever since he touched her that first time and made her orgasm for the first time ever. She knew he wanted it also because she could feel him throb against her whenever she offered something in return. Why would he not let her though? She had seen his member before. It was not like he was small or anything. He was actually anything but small, so there was no reason why he would be embarrassed about it. "Kyumi," she pouted, "it's not fair, Naruto. I want to touch you too." "Do you really want to?" "I don't want to make you feel like you owe me anything," he said in response, placing one of his hands onto her cheek. Kumiko nodded her head, her cheeks turning a deep shade of red as she did so. "I want to make you feel good too, Naruto. Please." His cheeks flushed when he saw the want and desire in her eyes. "All right, Kyumi." Finally, she began with a smile, letting out a quiet sigh as she gave both of his shoulders a reassuring squeeze. "I was wondering when you would let me have a turn. I just needed one last push," he replied with enough hesitation for her to notice. Kumiko leaned forward and gave him a soft kiss on the cheek. "I know how intimidating being in a relationship can be, Naruto. Being with you makes me anxious enough. I cannot imagine what it must be like for you. As long as you accept me, Naruto, I will accept you. I just feel like I might do something wrong if I start asking you for these sorts of things, Kyumi. I don't want to eventually weird you out or anything," said Naruto softly before he pursed his lips. "You won't?" "How do you know?" he asked, his worry evident in his voice. Her smile widened as she pressed their foreheads together and looked into his eyes. "Because I love you, Naruto. I love you too, Kyumi." She placed a hand on top of the one he had on her cheek. "Take me back onto land, Naruto." Smiling at her, he cradled her against him, pressing her soft, doughy breasts against his muscular chest as he waded back onto land. As they got closer and closer, he could see the anticipation well in her eyes, turning them into an even bolder red than they usually were. When he did reach it, she pushed him down, easily doing so because of her insane strength. "You've really wanted this." "I have," she said with a sultry trill, her gaze slowly trailing down his body before resting on his groin. Seeing it was not enough. She wanted to be up close. Placing her hands on his chest, she slowly slid herself down until her face was right up beside it. Naruto was menacingly long, so much so that he could probably lay it across her face lengthwise, and thick enough that her dainty fingers would just barely be able to wrap around him. He radiated heat and a smell she found so incredibly lewd that just a sniff was enough to get her going again, especially when she placed her face close to his sack. And much to her delight, after having been in the water for several minutes, he was still as hard as a rock. "What a stud. You're looking at it so intently," he commented, biting down on her bottom lip as she looked up at him. She parted her lips to respond but stopped when he twitched. It's so lively. It's happy to see you," said Naruto jokingly, eliciting a soft giggle from her. "And I'm happy to see it." Kumiko flashed him a smirk before she wrapped her fingers around its base. He kept quiet after that, continuing to bite down on his bottom lip as he watched her go about pleasuring him. Kumiko began by stroking him, first with one hand but quickly using her second one as well. They were so soft. She ran her hands up and down his length, occasionally switching it up to see what he liked more. A telling groan made her learn quite quickly that he enjoyed it most when she kept one hand around his base while stroking the rest of him with the other. "That feels really good, Kyumi." The corners of her lips curved upwards to form a gentle smile as she continued stroking him. "I can tell." Copious amounts of precum began to ooze from his swollen tip as she continued. The lewd substance coated her hands, making them sticky and slippery, and causing every stroke she gave him to create these wonderfully erotic, wet noises. He was positively throbbing now. Occasionally he would buck his hips or let out a groan whenever her fingers would brush along one of his more sensitive spots. "Kumi, Tell me, Naruto, where do you want to come?" she asked, squeezing the hand she had wrapped around the base of his cock. He tried to answer, but instead groaned and bucked his hips against her hands. "I guess I get to decide." She grinned. Raising herself ever so slightly, she slid one of her arms underneath her breasts, and positioned them before him. Licking her lips in anticipation, she began to stroke him faster, gliding her hand up his entire length, swirling it around his head, before sliding it back down. She watched as his expression contorted in pleasure and as his muscles began to flex and tighten, giving her all the hints she needed to know that he was getting close. Just watch, Naruto. Watch as you come on my breasts. These breasts that you love so much." He swallowed quietly as he tilted his head upwards to look at her. Everything came together then. The sight of her beautiful face and those gorgeous breasts of hers, combined with that sweet sensation of her hand working up and down his length, along with the sweet, sultry whispers she sent his way, finally pushed him over the edge. Bucking his hips one last time, he felt her grip around him tighten as he finally reached his climax. His cock throbbed as several thick ropes of his hot, potent seed erupted from it, most of it landing where she wanted it to, her breasts. Some of it also landed on her neck and her hand. For a few seconds, neither of them did anything as they both tried to recover. She was completely enthralled by the sight, the smell, and the warm sensation of it against her skin, so much so that she actually shuddered. She had expected him to come a lot but nowhere near this much. He had thrown his head back against the ground and was busy trying to get his breathing back to normal. They both stayed quiet as they basked in the afterglow of what they had just done. Eventually, the silence was broken when Kumiko spoke up. "Naruto? That was really hot," she confessed, her cheeks flushing as she glanced down at her cum-covered breasts. "It was?" he said breathlessly in response. "You came so much." She trailed off as she brought the hand she had used to finish him off up to her lips. "I wonder." He exhaled quietly. "Kumi." Naruto watched as she extended her tongue and gave a tentative lick to her hand, taking some of his cum into her mouth. Tasting it immediately caused her to blush as she found that his stuff was oddly delicious. It was lewd, primal, and faintly sweet. She wanted more of it. Licking her hand clean, she then got to dabbing it off of her breasts, humming enthusiastically now as she cleaned herself off. "I'm turning into such a lewd girl for you, Naruto," she said bashfully after licking herself clean, her blush deepening as she looked up at him. "You better take responsibility." He let out a quiet groan as he slowly sat upright. Reaching forward, he began patting her on the head, eliciting a soft, happy purr from her. "I'll be sure to." Naruto smiled at her. She suddenly pouted. "I wish you had made more noise, Naruto." He gently lifted a brow. "Oh, whenever you touch me, I make so many lewd noises," Kumiko began, folding her arms underneath her breasts. "It's embarrassing. I wanted to get back at you." "Maybe you will, eventually," he replied as he continued running his fingers through her hair. "Next time," she said confidently. Bending over, he wrapped his arms around her, and pulled her against him. "I'll be looking forward to that." She let out as she placed her hands on his shoulders in tandem. "I bet you will. I bet you're looking forward to the next time you get to play with my breasts as well." He let out a soft chuckle. "I do too, Naruto. I'm really looking forward to it," confessed Kumiko, blushing at her own words, before she leaned a bit closer to him, and clasped her hands behind his neck. "It feels really good whenever you touch them. It felt really good when you... When I made you come onto my breasts?" she asked, his embarrassment emboldening her. Naruto slowly nodded his head. "Yeah." After he trailed off, they both stayed quiet for a few seconds as they savored this loving embrace with each other. Eventually though, Kumiko decided to comment on something. "You're still hard. Do you want me to do it again?" He blushed. I'd like that." She smirked. "You can be very cute sometimes, Naruto. You're cute all the time, Kumi." Kumiko hummed quietly. Only because I have someone to be cute for." He let out a few heavy breaths before responding. "I love you." "I love you too." There was a moment of silence. "So, round 2. He did not answer immediately. "Yes, please." Chapter number 7, Into the Jungle. She was really beautiful. That thought had been on his mind for a while now as he gazed lovingly at her face as she slept. It was not often that he was the first one to wake up, but when he would savor the few minutes he would get to just admire that peaceful sleeping expression of hers. Kumiko was illuminated by the dim light of the rising sun peeking through slits in their shelter, which gave her soft, tanned skin this gentle glow that he found both soothing and calming. Her silky, short orange hair was splayed somewhat messily on his similarly colored jacket which they had both used as a pillow, making her seem relaxed and casual, which she was as she slept beside him. Her body was molded against his, the only separating them from each other being the clothes that they had worn to bed. The fabric between them was so thin though that both could feel the full warmth emanating from the other. He was just a bit warmer than she was, which was the reason why she was snuggled up so hard against him. Feeling bold, Naruto slowly raised a hand, and placed it against her cheek. He marveled at the smoothness and the softness of it before he began caressing her, slowly moving his fingers along her cheekbone, gently rolling stray locks of her hair off of her face, past her ear, onto his jacket. Slowly, her cheeks began to warm up as they flushed, and the corners of her lips curved upwards to form a gentle smile. Her body was reacting to his touch without her knowing it. She then arched her back slightly, pressing her chest against his arm as she slowly stirred. For a second, he thought that she was going to wake up. Then he was taken by surprise when she slowly parted her lips and whispered his name. Naruto. Exhaling softly, she then relaxed again. She had said his name so sweetly, as if she was humming contentedly after eating a spoonful of honey. Overcome with happiness, he could not help but crack a smile. Sooner or later, she was going to wake up. Then they would start their day together. There was no rush, no worries, and no responsibilities except for each other. Naruto had been wary at first at how he would handle living on this island. Now, he was in total bliss. And it was all because of her. Birds began to chirp as the life on the island began to wake up. It did not take long for their individual notes to begin complementing each other, combining into a jungle song with an upbeat melody. As the animals on the island stirred, so did Kumiko. He watched her brow furrow slightly as she slowly began to wake up, her expression relaxing over time as she drifted closer to consciousness. Red met blue when she finally opened her eyes and looked into his. "Good morning," he greeted, flashing her a toothsome smile. Kumiko hummed softly and returned the smile. Good morning, Naruto. Aren't you up early today? Somehow I managed to wake up before you did, he replied as he cupped her cheek. Did you sleep well? I always sleep well when I'm with you, she said before slowly raising her hand to place it atop of his. Same. Naruto nodded. She let out a quiet groan as she rolled her shoulders. Do you want to watch the sun rise today or do you want to sleep in with me? He lifted a brow. Oh? There's a second option this time? Only because I don't want to get up? Said Kumiko with a pout. It'd be a waste to be snuggled up against you and not spend at least a few minutes cuddling. If cuddling is on the menu, then I'll pick sleeping in with you. Naruto gave her another smile. She grinned. Good. Sliding one of his arms under her, he wrapped both around her mid-back and pulled her closer against him. Her movements were a bit less coordinated, but she did her best to move in tandem, and ended up clasping her hands behind his neck, where she liked putting them best whenever he was embracing her. He was quick to position one of his hands elsewhere though, deciding to place it on her hip instead, much to her delight. While it was early, it was not too early for him to play around a bit with her body. I wonder which part of my body you like the most, Naruto? He responded immediately. Your face, of course. Your face is what I look forward to seeing every time I wake up. Well, she blushed as she stammered. I meant. Besides my face, I mean. Oh, he let out, his cheeks flushing slightly. Please tell me, Naruto. I want to know what to flaunt more to get your attention, said Kumiko, her blush deepening as she tried her best to sound bold. Well, if you really want to know. I do. I really like your butt the most, he finally answered, swallowing quietly before he said more. It's so round and plump. I really like how it jiggles a bit whenever you walk with those white shorts of yours. She bit down on her bottom lip. I thought you liked my breasts more, since you touch them the most. It's easier to touch your breasts and kiss you at the same time. Naruto exhaled slowly as his gaze drifted downwards towards the top of her breasts before he looked back up into her eyes. True. She trailed off, the corners of her lips curving upwards as her chest filled with pride after she caught him looking at her breasts. So, what about me? Kumiko hummed quietly. I really like your eyes, Naruto. They're my favorite color, blue. My favorite shade as well. Were they your favorite shade before or did your preference change when you fell in love with me? He asked, grinning as he gave her a firm squeeze on the hip. She let out a soft moan when she felt his strong hand squeeze down firmly around her hip. Her wide hips were a double blessing. They gave her a wonderfully plump lower half and plenty of extra meat for him to play with. Yes, her slender waist, wide hips, and thick thighs made for quite the fantastic figure. Well, I mean. Her ears slowly bent downwards as she blushed. Yes. Naruto let out a chuckle before leaning forward to give her a kiss on the nose. You really are too cute sometimes. She hummed in response, her cheeks flushing after he kissed her. You know, I sort of want to know what your favorite part of my body is too. Besides my eyes, I mean, he said, giving her hip another squeeze, eliciting another moan from her. Your chest, she confessed, moving one hand down to pressing against one of his taut pectorals. I love your chest the most. It's so sturdy. And when I lay my head against it, I can hear your heartbeat. Your answer was a lot more romantic than mine was, commented Naruto, smiling at her words. Kumiko let out an amused snort. Obviously it must mean that I am the more romantic person out of both of us? Are you sure about that? He asked, his smile widening slightly. Well, I mean, maybe, I can be romantic too, you know. Naruto trailed off as his face slowly got closer to hers. Her cheeks flushed. Oh, come on. I make it too easy for you. She closed her eyes in anticipation when she felt his warm breath against her lips. She could feel him now even if he had not kissed her yet, the firmness of his lips, his warmth, and that alluring scent of his which she had grown to love. He was so close now. So close. Then something exploded. Literally exploded. Off into the distance, the sound of something blowing up echoed towards them, sending birds screeching as they flew away, and some animals off to begin stampeding away. Their little romantic moment completely derailed when that loud bang caused them both to jump in surprise. Geez, he let out, turning his head away towards wherever that explosion had come from. That nearly gave me a heart attack? Another explosion? She asked, pouting at the fact that he had not kissed her. Naruto looked back at her and nodded. Yeah? I think an animal might have stepped on an explosive trap or something. Better an animal than you. One less trap to worry about, said Kumiko, shrugging her shoulders before placing one of her hands onto his cheek. So, where were we, Naruto? You know, Kumi, I'm starting to wonder about those explosive traps, he replied, pursing her lips, causing her to pout again. Aren't you? Well, she trailed off. They're just randomly placed all over the jungle. Who knows if the only reason one of us hasn't stepped on another one yet is because of luck. Kumiko swallowed quietly. You say that, but it seems like you want to go into the jungle now, Naruto. Aren't you curious? He asked. I would be lying if I said I wasn't, she answered. Why don't we check out more of the jungle after breakfast? Suggested Naruto, offering her a reassuring smile. She let out a soft sigh. All right. Just promise you don't accidentally step on another one of those traps, all right? I won't. I promise. He leaned in and gave her a soft kiss on the lips. All right. Spending a few more moments inside of their shelter, they eventually got out after the sun had already risen in the sky. Sharing a simple breakfast of wild fruits and ocean fish, they then went over to the river, where they then bathed and decided to use it as a jumping-off point for their little expedition into the jungle. While the jarring explosion from earlier had been forgotten easily enough with about a half hour spent relaxing with each other in the river, the intense curiosity that they both felt for the rest of the island lingered. They had just gotten finished with their bath when their conversation picked back up. I wonder if it would be easier to get around if I could just ride on top of you while you were in your fox form, remarked Naruto, running his hands through his hair to aerate it. Kumiko shrugged her shoulders as she watched him from the rock she was sitting on. I don't think I will be using my fox form anytime soon, Naruto. Why is that? He asked as he put on his shirt. My chakra is not regenerating as fast as I expected it to, she answered, letting out a quiet sigh. This island has so little of it that it'll take a very long time for me to get back my tails. I fear that if a situation arises where I need to use a large quantity of chakra, I'll be without my tails forever. He walked over and went to caress her cheek with the back of his finger. Why? It is like? She trailed off as she took a moment to think up her explanation. I require a certain amount of chakra to keep being. I am made of the stuff after all. If I use it recklessly in my current state, I might cease to exist. I see, he said quietly before slowly pulling her into an embrace. Hopefully that never happens. Hummed Kumiko in response as she hugged him back. Naruto gave her a squeeze before pulling back. So, are you ready to head out, Kumi? I am. She smiled. I'm sure there are a lot of cool things out there ready to be discovered. There'd better be, he said, returning the smile before he walked over to collect his jacket. Though I guess the experience of exploring with my girlfriend is more than enough. Kumiko let out an amused snort. It had better be. I would not have minded another day where we spent cuddling together. Maybe you could have given me a belly-rubbing session or a massage. I think that this will be a nice change of pace though. It will be, replied Naruto, walking back to her and placing a hand on her shoulder. It'll just be you and me, Kyumi and Naruto, braving the wilderness? It's you and I, Naruto, she corrected. That works too. She smirked. It works because it's the correct way to say it. Any sentence that includes you and I, he began, emphasizing the word I, in a positive light is a correct sentence in my book. Even if it makes no sense. You're so cheesy, she commented, grinning at him. He grinned back. One of us has to be. I love you, Naruto. I really do, she said softly, her grin relaxing into a gentle smile as she took a step forward and pressed herself against him. He did not think that what he said was really that romantic, but he was not going to complain about hearing her tell him that she loved him. Wrapping an arm around her, he then pressed a kiss to her forehead. I love you too, Kyumi. She purred affectionately at his response before hugging him back again and looking up at him. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be taller one. Then you hold me like this and I just melt. Kumiko trailed off before pressing her cheek against his chest. Little spoon. Is that what they call it? Well, yeah, I guess, he replied. I want to be your little spoon, Naruto, she said, giggling quietly. Naruto blushed. God, you are too cute. Only for you, replied Kumiko before pulling away from him. Anyways, let's get going before we end up spending the entire day here just hugging. He nodded his head before offering her his hand. Let's. Kumiko hummed a happy note as she took his hand. I'll let you lead the way. I doubt I'll be able to see anything with how short I am in this form. You could always ride on my back, said Naruto as he began walking, moving in the direction that would lead them to the mountains eventually. Are you saying that because you want to feel my breasts pressing up against your back while you get to cradle my ass? She asked, flashing him a teasing smirk. His cheeks flushed. Well, now that you say that. Yes, She let out a satisfied hum. Perhaps later. For now, I just want to hold your hand. Naruto hummed in kind and nodded his head. While there was fun to be had whenever he got to touch her bountiful breasts or her plump rear, he liked it also when they shared the much more simpler touches, such as holding hands. Hers was warm and her dainty fingers fitted really well between his slightly broader ones. Their size difference made him want to protect her even though he knew that in all likelihood that it would most likely be her protecting him. Still, it was nice to imagine himself in the role of the protector as they made their way deeper into the jungle. It smells sweet here, he said softly. That is because you've been sniffing my hair for the last 20 minutes. She was right. He had been. It was not his fault that the faint sweetness of her perfect hair was so alluring to him. You're looking at me more than you are the jungle, Naruto? She pouted. He let out an amused snort. Well, it is hard to keep my eyes off you. You're just that beautiful, Naruto, she said, trailing off as her cheeks flushed. Too much. Kumiko shook her head. Not at all. Just. Warn me next time you plan on complimenting me. My heart beats quickly enough already when I'm around you. Kyumi. She lofted a brow. You really are just too cute. I've heard that from you at least 100 times now. And yet my heart still flutters when I hear it? She let out a soft sigh. Where were you all my life, Naruto? I wish I could have been there for you since the beginning. I'm happy that I can at least be here for you now though. Naruto smiled at her. Kumiko smiled back at him. Oh, Naruto. Do you want to hear more of my stories while we walk? Sure. She paused for a few seconds as she took a moment to think up a story from her life. You know, I remember during the earlier days of your kind, Naruto. Most of it is a blur, but there is one day that I still remember with clarity, she began, closing her eyes as she took herself back to that day. It was during the winter time. The local monkeys were celebrating New Year's. They were jolly, and they were loud. So long as they did not try to pick a fight with me though, I would not mind them. He stayed quiet and listened intently to her story. A young lad, a bit older than you, had somehow stumbled upon my domain. He was drunk, with a bottle of wine in one hand and a whole basket of mandarin oranges in the other. He told me that he had just left a family party and had somehow gotten lost on the way home, continued Kumiko, smiling gently at the fond memory. I was not really interested in what he had to say, but then he offered to share a drink with me. I was more keen on snagging some of his oranges, but I figured trying out some of that local monkey brew would be a fun experience. How did that go? He asked. It was nice. I had to morph into my current form to fit the tiny cup he had offered to me in my hand. While I did not like the taste, I found the effects of the wine to be pleasant. The oranges were tasty too. Plus, it was nice holding a conversation with someone even though he was drunk, she answered, letting out a quiet sigh. What happened afterwards? Kumiko shrugged her shoulders. I got to know him. While he and I were worlds apart, we connected well enough that I did not mind seeing him again. We became drinking buddies, he called it. Then, Naruto pursed his lips. Then, he grew old. He came less often as he got older. The hike back and forth eventually got too much for him. I learned that he passed away not long after his last visit. Oh, he let out, pursing his lips as he gave her hand a squeeze. He was wise, you know? For a monkey, I mean, she said, canting her head slightly as she offered Naruto a warm smile. I remember the conversation we had when he had just gotten married. I had not known of love then, but the way he described it. I know I love you, Naruto. There is not a single doubt in my mind. He returned the smile. I may not be wise. Heck, I might not even be that smart. I don't need to be either of those things though to know that I love you too, Kumi. You are wise in your own way, replied Kumiko, her smile widening as she squeezed his hand back. Am I? She let out an amused snort. Yes. Now. Any idea where we are? Naruto looked around. Somehow, they had wandered onto a path in the middle of nowhere. It was an old trail, paved with bits of rock, dried branches, and dotted with colorful flowers. Someone or some group had created it a while ago, he thought as he pursed his lips. Perhaps if they walked down it a bit longer, they would end up somewhere with some answers to the questions that they had? Not sure, he finally answered. Do you want to keep going? He nodded. I do. You know, the smell here is a bit different than the rest of the jungle, commented Kumiko a few moments after they picked up the pace again. How so? He asked, turning his head to look at her. Stale. Weirdly acidic. It's subtle. Naruto quirked a brow. You can smell that? I can't smell anything at all. I have a superior nose, she replied. I hope it isn't another explosive trap. He pursed his lips. Do you want to check it out? The smell is coming from above ground. I doubt it's a trap, said Kumiko in response, sniffing softly a few times before turning her head towards the source of the smell. Let's see. Trailing off, she gave his hand a tug, prompting him to start following her. She initially followed the path but took a turn a few minutes into it, guiding him off into a dense grove of foliage. While it was kind of tough keeping up because of all the dodging he had to do to avoid being smacked in the face by low-hanging branches, he was able to do so well enough that they did not need to stop once for him to catch up. They did pause a few times though whenever Kumiko would need to sniff a few times to pick up the scent again. While she had gotten more curious, he just got confused. Just what were they heading towards? Then he saw it. It was peeking out from a heavy covering of shrubs and leaves, but the bits of concrete gray that he could see separated it from the natural green of the jungle around it. From what he could see of it, it looked old, ruined, and long abandoned. After a moment of observation, he spotted the entrance, which had been partially obscured by a moss-covered log that had fallen over it. It was a bunker. Now he had even more questions. The smell is coming from inside there. Kumiko pointed towards the entrance. I'll go in first, said Naruto, letting go of her hand before making his way near the fallen log. Hopefully nothing crazy happens. She nodded her head. Hopefully. Lowering himself down into an awkward squat, he shuffled slowly underneath the log, and made his way into the bunker. The smell inside was stale, but he had yet to detect anything acidic like Kumiko had described. Not much was to be seen inside of the bunker. It was spacious, had a foliage-covered opening which he assumed was meant to be looked out from, and was filled with random bits of mess. He had no idea what to make of the random metal cylinders scattered around the ground nor the white blanket on the wall with a red circle drawn in the center of it. Anything interesting in there? She called out. I've no idea, he said back to her. Come in here. Maybe you might know what this stuff is. He heard her let out a quiet grunt as she crawled underneath the log to join him inside of the bunker. Guh. The smell is even worse inside. Kumiko pinched her nose. Is it? I can't really smell anything. It's very stuffy in here. She narrowed her eyes as she looked around. He hummed back. Kumiko sniffed a few more times before walking over to a rotten wooden crate near the back. Prying the wooden boards open, she let out a quiet groan as the supposed acidic smell became even stronger for her. Feeling curious, Naruto walked up, and watched as she pulled out a sealed dark bottle containing a bit of clear liquid. What's that? Asked Naruto, canting his head to the side. She held up the bottle and showed him the faded label. It's sake. Really, really old and really, really spoiled sake. Is that where the smell came from? She nodded. Yep. Ooh. It smells almost as strong as you do, Naruto. Not in the good way though. As strong? Naruto's cheeks flushed as he controlled the urge to start sniffing himself. In the good way. Relax, Naruto. I wouldn't shove my face so close to you if you didn't smell as good as you do, replied Kumiko before she placed the bottle down. He opened his mouth and then closed it when he realized that he was going to sputter, eliciting a soft giggle from her. Embarrassment overcame him in that moment, causing his blush to deepen, furthering her amusement. You're so adorable when you blush. It makes my chest swell with pride whenever I can get your face to turn red, she said as she walked up to him. Yes, well. Trailing off, he raised a hand, and tugged at the collar of his shirt. Do you think anyone has been here recently? Kumiko shook her head. Nope. Besides yours, I don't detect the scent of any other monkey. It's just us. It seems like we've found ourselves at the entrance of a rabbit hole, Kumi. It does? Trailing off, she then gave the inside of the bunker another glance. Perhaps we should set up camp somewhere around here. Wouldn't the smell bother you? He asked wearily. She gave him a reassuring smile. I'll just bury my face in your neck when we sleep tonight. Ah? All right, replied Naruto, his cheeks flushing slightly. Setting up camp should be easy since there are two of us. Why don't you relax, Naruto? You've been walking all day. Let me set up camp. Naruto lifted a brow. You do that? For you, yes. Hang around. Drink some spoiled sake. I'm gonna find a way to make something that resembles a bed. He smiled at her. Thanks, Kumi. I'll spend some more time looking around. I'll join you later. All right, she said before she made her way back over to the entrance. Before I go, Naruto. Yes, Kumi. She blew him a kiss. Love you. His smile widened. Love you too. Chapter number 8, A Heated Moment. Exploring the island had yielded lots of rewards. From that single bunker they had discovered came a whole underground system of tunnels leading to all sorts of different places on the island. They had uncovered all sorts of things such as crates containing random bits and bobs, several more cases of spoiled sake, and weird metal contraptions that looked like tubes with switches on them. Those were actually not that interesting. The reason why being they had no idea what to make of all of it. Plus, they had almost completely forgotten about all that stuff when they found the best thing on the island thus far. It was a natural hot spring. A natural hot spring surrounded by delectable fruit trees and close to a beautiful clearing large enough for them to make another shelter in. Not only that, but it was also close enough to the river that they could enjoy their water hot or cold as they pleased. It was as if heaven had opened up to them and welcomed them inside after all the gross tunnels they had to crawl through. Discovering that gloriously steamy spring had made the entire trip worth it, which it already was since they got to spend time together. They wanted to savor this discovery, it was that great. So, for the first few days, they did not dare step into it or even dip a toe into its healing waters. It had been Kumiko's decision to wait a while before using the hot spring because she knew that the moment they stepped in, they were going to end up instantly addicted to the feeling of hot water after all those weeks without on the island. Naruto had protested at first, but a few soft kisses and sweet looks had him swayed very easily. She had that power over him after all. Now that those few days were up though, they could finally enjoy themselves in the hot spring. Oh, let out Naruto, shuddering as he slowly lowered himself into the blissfully hot waters of the spring. Kumiko let out a soft and amused snort as she watched him. She had let him go in first. It feels that good, huh? It does, he said with a sigh, sliding himself further down so that he could rest his shoulders and the back of his head against the smooth rocks that were around the hot spring. It is as if I'm melting? It can't really be that goo. Kumiko let out a moan the moment she dipped a toe in. See? It's that good. She blushed as she slowly sank herself down into the water. It really does. She trailed off slowly, lingering ever so slightly on the last syllable of what she had said as she was overcome with bliss. And I thought I was being dramatic, he commented, letting out a quiet chuckle as he slowly made his way over to her. It has been almost a century since I have experienced the pleasure of a hot spring, Naruto, she said softly, letting out a soft sigh akin to his from earlier. Naruto hummed in response. I guess that might make it more intense for you. You know, Naruto. Began Kumiko, her nervous tone causing Naruto to quirk a brow. Maybe the reason why it is so intense for me when you. Maybe it is because I am several thousands of years old and you are the first person to ever touch me like that. Is that a bad thing? He asked. She quickly shook her head. And no. Not at all, Naruto. Well, Naruto trailed off as he took a breath. It was really intense for me when you first used your hand. I hadn't really touched myself since we came onto this island because at first I gave you no privacy. And now because you have me to do it for you, she asked, offering him a gentle smile as she slowly waded over to where he was sitting. Yeah. His cheeks were flushed as he smiled back at her. She hummed a sweet, song-like note in response as she sat herself right next to him. Wrapping her arms around one of his, she purposefully pressed her large, plump, and bountiful breasts against him as she rested her head against his shoulder. He reacted in turn by caressing her cheek and tucking some stray locks of her silky orange hair back with his free hand. The sensation of his fingers brushing past one of her ears elicited a quiet purr from her, which encouraged him to go a bit further and give her some delightful ear scratches, causing her eyes to roll back and for her to start moaning. And Naruto? Kumiko trailed off before letting out another moan when he turned his head and began nibbling on her other ear. Wow. That's new. Your ears are always so sensitive, he commented in between nibbles. Kumiko nodded slowly. They are? Are you the most sensitive there? He asked, whispering those words into her ear before he resumed nibbling on them. I don't know, Naruto. I don't know which part of me is the most sensitive. He licked his lips. Do you want to find out? Those words had come out so unexpectedly husky that she had actually shuddered when she heard him whisper them into her ear. She could feel the heat that she had become familiar with after all those wonderfully intimate moments that she had shared with him quickly building up inside of her in that spot just below her navel. She knew it now to be her womb, and her cheeks too as she blushed. With the steam from the spring rising up before them, she could not tell whether this slight haze was from it or the budding arousal that was quickly overtaking her. I do. She answered, her blush deepening when he slowly slid his hand down from her ear to caress and then cup her cheek. You've gotten a lot smoother, Naruto. The corner of his lips curved upwards to form a proud smirk. I think it's time that I caught up, she said, returning the smirk as she moved to straddle his hips, her sudden boldness causing him to widen his eyes in surprise. Don't you think, Naruto? Her smirk faltered for a moment when she felt how stiff he had gotten when he was sweet-talking her. He was so incredibly hard that it took nearly every ounce of her willpower not to shudder again. Just feeling his large, hot, and manly cock that close to her special place made her loins burn with want, no, need. Kumiko held herself there for a few seconds as she calmed herself. Then, without warning, she clasped her hands behind his neck and slowly slid herself down, pressing her bountiful breasts against his sturdy chest as she did so. Her efforts were rewarded when Naruto let out a soft groan as he felt the top of his member slide up against that tight and smooth space between the fat globes of her plump and perky ass. He could feel his cheeks flush. It was now his turn to blush. I have a feeling that it doesn't really matter what I think at the moment, Kumi, he eventually said. She grinned foxily at him. You have as much power over me as I do over you, Naruto. Though it seems that I've sapped you of all of it at the moment. It does? He placed his hands down onto her hips and gave them both a firm squeeze, causing her to bite down on her bottom lip. So, how do you want to go about this, Kumi? She licked her lips sensually before slowly parting them. I want to try something new. Naruto lifted a brow. Oh. I want to use my mouth. His blush deepened. Oh. Please, she asked sweetly, canting her head to compliment the innocent, wanting look that she was now giving him as she began to slowly grind her rear against him. Naruto swallowed quietly, the action doing nothing to help him come up with any words. All he could do was nod, which he did, slowly. Utterly speechless, he let her guide him up onto one of the large, flatter, and smoother stones surrounding the hot spring. Then, he watched as she placed her dainty and delicate hands onto his knees and eased his legs apart before sliding herself between them. He could feel her arousal roll off of her body in waves as she licked her plump lips at the sight of his cock before her, joining with his as she got closer and closer to him. I have been dreaming of this for a while now, he confessed, his blush making its return. She looked up into his eyes before giving him a gentle smile. Allow me to fulfill your dream then, my dearest? Ooh, dearest. I actually really liked that, said Naruto, returning the smile. I have been thinking about what else to call you for a while now, began Kumiko as she canted her head to one side and began nuzzling her cheek against his inner thigh. Like honey or darling. I ended up liking my dearest the most. It's fitting, he replied, letting out a shaky breath as he tried his best not to fidget. I wouldn't mind if you used all three. They each have their own charm to them. They do. Kumiko trailed off as she slowly dipped forward and pressed face against his cock. Your thing has a charm too, Naruto. It's luring me in, seducing me in its own way, turning me into a lewd girl just for you. He let out a shaky breath as he watched her. God, you're so big, Naruto. Look at how your thing manages to reach all the way to my forehead when I put my chin down on you. And the smell? She paused as she inhaled, softly at first before she did so again much more deeply. I could get drunk off of it. Naruto would not ever dare tell her this, but he thought that she looked the sexiest when she had her face pressed up against his cock. Just the way her eyes would become half-lidded combined with how her cheeks flushed and the hazy smile she had on made him go absolutely crazy. Part of him wanted to just grab her by the sides of her head and force himself into her mouth and down her throat, to feel her choke and gag on him. The part that won over, however, demanded that he watch as she praised, essentially worshipped, his cock. Kumi, he said huskily, almost impatiently, as he slowly placed one of his hands atop her head. Sorry for making you wait, Naruto. She offered him another smile before she moved one of her hands and wrapped her dainty fingers around the base of his cock. All this steam is just going to my head. Raising herself until her wet, bountiful breasts were out of the water, she then dipped further forward, and pressed a soft kiss to his sensitive head. His thing twitched in response and began to ooze that delicious pre-cum of his that she had grown to love from its tip. Emboldened by this, she gave it a few licks, causing his breathing to quickly hasten as he got more and more aroused. It took every ounce of his strength to not buck his hips when she began to swirl her wet, delicate, and warm tongue on his tip. That feels really good, Kumi, he said breathily as he began running his fingers through her silky, orange hair, tucking it back as he did so, earning him an appreciative moan from her. Encouraged by his praise, she then took the head of his cock into her mouth. Sealing her plump lips over it, she then began experimenting with her tongue. Naruto could only throw his head back and groan as he felt her begin to put in work with that wonderfully warm tongue of hers. She swirled it around his head, glided it up and down that sensitive spot at the base of it, and teased out more of his precum by simply sucking on it. Wanting more and wanting better from herself, she then began to stroke him with her hands, much to his delight. Your cock is delicious, she murmured after she released his tip from her mouth. Is it really? He asked. Well, your precum is. She grinned at him. Feeling bold, he slowly pressed down on her head. Please go back to sucking, Kumi. She let out a giggle. All right, Naruto. Anything for you, my dearest? Sealing her lips over his sensitive head once again, Kumiko then wrapped her fingers from both hands at the base of his cock before she tried taking him as deep as she could. She heard him suck in a breath as she took inch after inch of him into her mouth before pausing when she felt herself about to gag. Closing her eyes, she kept him there, and stroked him with her hands as she waited for her throat to relax. Peeking up at him, she could not help but smile when she saw the pleasured expression on his face. Wow! He gasped. It was easy knowing what to do when she could tell what he liked best by listening to the noises he made. She was quick to figure out that he liked his blowjobs like his handjobs, with one of her hands wrapped around his base. Doing it how he liked, she began to bob her head up and down on his cock, making sure to caress him with her tongue, while keeping it steady with one hand and using her other to fondle and caress his heavy sack. Sucking hard to the point where her cheeks went concave, she felt her chest swell with pride when he let out a groan at the intense increase of suction. That feels amazing, Kumi, stammered Naruto, his breathing shallow and his pulse quick as he tried not to come. He was so close now. He could feel everything she was doing to him, even the most subtle of touches from her, from the squeezes she would give to the base of his cock, to that sweet sensation of her plump lips sliding up and down his shaft, and her warm tongue gliding and swirling, worshipping his sensitive tip. There was a tightness down there that he could have never possibly imagined as his member began to swell inside of her hot, welcoming mouth. She picked up the pace, causing him to bite down on his lip as all those wonderful sensations were intensified. I am coming. Kumiko hummed appreciatively in response, encouraging him further as he began to buck his hips, forcing himself deeper against her throat. The muscles in his legs and abdomen tensed up and tightened when he finally came. His cock throbbed and he balled some of her hair in his hand as he erupted inside of her mouth. She moaned lewdly as several thick ropes of his hot, potent seed shot onto her tongue, against her throat, and the inside of her cheeks. She sucked him earnestly, swallowing his cum whenever she could, drawing out his orgasm for as long as possible for both him and herself. Falling back with her still between his legs, he let out a heavy breath followed up by a few soft moans as she continued to bob her head, slower now that he had finally came. Kumi. She slowly pulled herself off of her cock, making sure to keep the suction going all the way until she finally released him. Naruto. God. He said breathlessly as he raised an arm to cover his eyes. That was too good. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself, my dearest, replied Kumiko, climbing up over him, and offering him a gentle smile once they were face to face. Naruto managed to smile back all the while trying to catch his breath. You're amazing, Kumi. That I am, she said, her smile slowly turning into a proud smirk as she placed both of her hands on his broad shoulders. Don't you think that you are even more amazing though, Naruto? How so? He asked. You have the most powerful tailed beast in the world as your lover, began Kumiko, grinning foxily at him before she then lowered herself and began nuzzling her cheek against his chest. And you've made her fall for you in such a way that she has willingly made herself into your lewd, little vixen. He felt his face heat up as he blushed. Well, now that you put it that way, Kumi, I am glad you see it my way now, she said softly, trailing one of her hands down from his shoulder down to one of his toned lateral muscles. He hummed softly, closing his eyes as he stretched. Kumi, yes. Naruto moved one arm to wrap around her lower back and reached down with the other to grab firmly onto one of her butt cheeks. You ready for your turn? Are you going to use your mouth too? She asked, her cheeks flushing when he gave her plump rear a squeeze. Of course, he answered huskily, his gruff-sounding voice causing her blush to deepen before he rolled them over so that he was on top and she was beneath him. Kumiko bit down on her bottom lip. I'm really starting to like that voice you use. Really? She nodded her head and offered him a reassuring smile. I find it really sexy. I'm still nowhere near as sexy as you are, Kumi, said Naruto in response, moving one of his hands up to cup her cheek. I really am the luckiest man in the world. Definitely. Now are you going to keep talking, Naruto, or are you going to kiss me? She asked, flashing him a toothsome grin. Letting out an amused snort, Naruto then slid his other hand underneath her head and dipped forward. Pressing their lips together, she immediately reciprocated by parting hers just enough to give him the option to use his tongue if he wanted to and by placing both of her hands on his shoulders. Guiding her so that she canted her head to the side, he then took that option, slipping his tongue inside of her mouth, seemingly uncaring of what had just been inside of it just a few minutes ago. It seemed she cared a lot more than he did though because her eyes widened when he did it, though they quickly fluttered back closed as she melted into the kiss. Kumiko was moaning without even knowing it as he continued to kiss her. His lips were so firm, and they seemed so perfectly molded against hers that if this was how they were going to spend the rest of the day, she was fine with it. Though as he slowly parted from it and began to trail those wonderful lips of his down her body, she knew, and was excited at the fact, that they were going to be doing a lot more. I know that you wanted to find which part of me was the most sensitive, but, Naruto, dearest, there's only one spot I want you to focus on right now, she said bashfully, her body flushing wherever he kissed as she slowly spread her legs for him. Please, you're so hot when you act like that, he said, licking his lips as he positioned himself between her legs with his lower half in the water of the hot spring. When I act all submissive for you, my dearest? She asked, the corners of her lips curving upwards to form a wanting smile on her face as she raised her legs into the air, causing her delicate folds to spread in kind, revealing its soft pink color to him. Naruto snaked both of his hands underneath her meaty thighs and gave her a rough tug towards him, causing her to let out a surprised squeak. Yes. Oh, she let out, blushing at his boldness. Sinking himself down into the water, he moved his hands so that they were on her inner thighs instead. Keeping her legs spread, he dipped forward, and placed his head between them. There was such an enticingly sweet smell that was coming from her that made him want to dive right in, but he wanted to savor her as much as she had savored him. She was getting aroused just by him looking, her cheeks were flushed, and this clear, thin, and slimy liquid had begun to ooze out from her slit, down her taint and then her asshole. Some of it even managed to drip down onto the stone that she was lying on. You're that excited, huh? He asked as he looked up at her. She nodded her head, her blush deepening as she did so. Why yes. It was such an adorably honest reaction that he had blushed also. Letting out a soft chuckle, he pressed his fingers against her inner thighs, causing them to sink into her plump flesh and for her sex to spread even further, revealing her clit and her tight slit. Swallowing quietly, he then tilted his head forward, and gave her a soft lick from the bottom of her sex all the way to her clit. She moaned softly and moved her hands up to the crook of her knees to hold back her legs as she bent them, giving him even more room to work with. Yeah. She let out, her eyes glazing over with lust and arousal. Emboldened by her taste, and by that cute noise she had made, he gave her another lick. Then, moving his hands around her legs to her hips, he then pressed his lips against her sex, and began gliding his tongue up and down her delicate folds. She bit down on her bottom lip and squeezed her eyes shut, the pleasure quickly getting to her. Not seeing somehow made it even hotter for her, having one sense taken away from her made everything he did to her feel even more intense. She was panting now, her breaths coming out hot and labored as he continued working her with his tongue and lips. Kumiko let out a moan when he began focusing on her clit. He was gentle with it, caressing it with his lips while using his tongue to swirl around it. She had thought that it was going to be too intense, but he was doing everything so well, it was magical. She could feel it now, the fire, building up inside of her, spreading to every part of her body, her fingers and even her toes, as he eased her closer and closer to her climax. She had thought that she would have lasted longer, but he had found that perfect rhythm so quickly and had stuck to it so well that any second now, her eyes were going to roll back into her head, and she was going to come. And Naruto. I am coming. There was no holding back now, she thought as she threw her head back. Her legs moved on their own when they tensed up around his head. Squeezing him between her meaty thighs, she began to quiver when her orgasm hit her. A powerful surge went through her as she came, hard, accumulating into her letting out a loud cry of pleasure. Her entire body flushed, her back arched, and her toes curled as she rode out her intense climax. Her lewd honey seeped out her sex, coating the bottom half of his face along with her inner thighs, marking him with her sweet scent. Dearest. Her legs slowly sank back down as her muscles began to relax. Her chest continued to heave, causing her heavy breasts to rise and fall with each breath as she tried to calm herself. She had thought before that experiencing something as wonderful as this would have given her the patience she needed to wait for when they were both ready to go all the way together. All it did was make that fire inside of her burn even hotter. She really was turning into a lewd girl for him. "It's my turn to say it," he said, the corner of his lips curving upwards. "You taste delicious, Kumi." Kumiko's cheeks flushed as she slowly looked up at him. "Do I now?" "You do," answered Naruto, collecting some of her cum from his chin before licking it off his finger. Her blush deepened. "I wonder if it is as hot for you watching me swallow your seed as it was for me just now when you did that?" He let out an amused snort. "It is? God, Naruto." She trailed off as she laid her head back down on the grass. "That was the best one so far? Do you need help getting back into the water, Kumi?" "Yes. My legs have gone numb from quivering too much," she answered, eliciting a chuckle from him. Smiling at her straightforward answer, he waded closer to her and scooped her up into his arms. Cradling her, he then made his way over to a less dirty side of the hot spring before sinking both of them down into the water. Her immediate reaction was to let out a contented sigh while he simply closed his eyes. When he finally let her go, she stayed pressed against him and nuzzled her cheek on his chest, prompting him to go ahead and wrap his arms around her again. "You're so affectionate whenever we do these sorts of things, Kumi," he commented as he looked down at her. "It's your fault that I get like this. All the pleasure just makes my brain stop working," she said in response, purring softly when he pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. Naruto gave her a squeeze. "Mine too, Kumi. Good thing I don't use my brain that often anyways." Kumiko let out an amused snort. "You might not, but I do. Though, I guess it's not so bad. Not using it when I'm with you. That was really cheesy." "Yeah, well. What would you have said?" "I love you." She blushed. "Yeah, well, love you too, Naruto." Chapter number 9, Love is Complicated. She was happy. Feeling his soothing warmth as he slept beside her was more than enough to bring a smile to her face. For a ninja, Naruto was quite the heavy sleeper, which meant that she could touch, caress, and even lick him, if she wanted to, without him waking up. When he was awake, and he had that determined expression on his face, she thought him to be exceptionally handsome. And when he was asleep, she got to see a cuter side of him, a more vulnerable side. Just from a glance, she was able to tell whether the dreams that he was having was good or bad. He would smile when he was having a good dream and his brow would be furrowed when he was having a bad one. Right now, from the way he was occasionally licking his lips, she could tell that he was having a dream about ramen. Or about something that involved a lot of licking. Still, her smile slowly faltered. There would be that rare occasion where she would wake up to see his brow knotted up and his expression tight with what she knew to be bad dream. They would leave as quickly as they had come. The moment he woke up, he would return to his usual, happy self. While she could tell that he was having a bad dream, she knew not what he was dreaming of. She had yet to ask him. The fear of seeing his peachy smile slowly fade away was the reason why. Kumiko knew that if she was truly serious about loving Naruto, then she would have to ask him eventually. It was her role to make sure that her partner was happy as much as it was his. She would ask him at the proper time. And if there was not one, she would just follow his example and blurt it out. If there was one thing that made up for Naruto's impulsiveness, it was that he always had the most wholesome, most purest, and most genuine of intentions for her, and those that he had left behind. Perhaps that was why he was having those bad dreams? Maybe he missed them. Well, obviously he did. She knew that he was close to a lot of his fellow monkeys. All those friends of his. She had taken them away from him when she had escaped the seal. That may not have even been the worst thing that she has done to him. Kumiko let out a shaky breath as the bitter feeling of guilt began to well inside of her chest. It was such an unfamiliar sensation that she had almost panicked at first. Suffocating, gnawing, and terrible, that would be how she would describe the feeling. Looking at Naruto only brought a slight bit of solace to her heart as uneasiness overwhelmed her. Squeezing her eyes shut, she pressed herself against him, trying her best to forget, to escape, all the bad feelings that were now plaguing her mind after coming to that long overdue realization. Oh, Naruto. Falling in love with him had changed her. She could no longer recognize herself now. Especially not when she compared herself to who she was before she had ended up on this island. There was hardly ever a time back then that she felt so disgusted by her own actions, that she acknowledged her own selfishness, that she considered anyone besides herself. They had considered her many things: nature's judgment, an unholy monster, and a god. Naruto had easily danced past all those shallow labels that she had tacked onto herself and found her true self that she had kept hidden away. Perhaps he saw something within her, past all the faults that she had once thought to be her virtues, that made him fall in love with her. It was funny. The more she loved him, the less she loved herself. When they had first began this relationship, she had been worried about whether or not he was worthy for her. Now, she was worried if she could ever be worthy enough for him. The old man from all those years ago had warned her about this. He had told her that she would have to go through the necessary suffering of growth if she ever wanted to experience the joy, hope, and happiness that could only come with true love. Knowing that, this pain was not so bad. Feeling it meant that her love for Naruto was real. She loved him, for real. The corners of her lips curved upwards ever so slightly as her smile began to return to her. Right now, she just wanted to wake him up so that she could tell him that she loved him over and over again, so that she could hold him, and hug all the feelings that words would fail to express into him. It would not be long now, she thought as the sun slowly began to rise, until he woke up and she would be able to do all those things to him. He let out, shifting ever so slightly as he finally began to stir. Naruto, darling, wake up, she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his cheek as she eased him into consciousness. He slowly opened his eyes and smiled when he finally saw her. Morning, Kyumi. She smiled back at him and gave his cheek a soft pinch. Good morning, Naruto. Am I too late to watch the sun rise with you? He asked as he rubbed his eyes. Just a bit, she answered, slowly lowering her hand, brushing it along the crook of his neck before placing it onto his arm. Not that I mind. I find that spending my mornings snuggled up against you are just as pleasant. Naruto's smile grew into a grin. I do too, Kyumi. She let out a contented sigh. I love your smile, Naruto. I hope to never forget it. I'll be sure to smile more then, he replied, his enthusiasm eliciting a chuckle from her. She gave his arm a soft squeeze before she trailed her hand down further to hold his. You'll end up overwhelming my heart if you smile at me all the time. I can only take so much of that feeling I get in my chest. What kind of feeling? Eesh, making me spell it out. She trailed off, the corners of her lips curving upwards to form a smile on her face as she pressed herself against him. It's love, Naruto. There. You happy? Naruto's blue eyes shimmered as if he was about to burst with joy, and somehow his grin grew even wider. Very. Kumiko blushed. Oh, Naruto. You know, he began, moving one of his hands to cup her cheek. I never really thought that this would be how my life turned out. Well, you did magically teleport onto some random island, she said sarcastically. He chuckled before he leaned in closer to her. Yeah, well, I meant falling in love. After I grew out of my crush for Sakura, I sort of just shoved that kind of stuff into the back of my head. Now all I can think about these days is you. I never really thought of love as something I would experience. I was too mighty, too powerful, too grand. Being in this form has humbled me. I don't want to go back, Naruto, replied Kumiko, swallowing quietly as her cheeks slowly began to heat up. But I feel like, if I ever did have the power to, I would go back. Oh? He quirked a brow. She nodded. I would go back. I would have done everything to make you as happy as you are now, from birth to adulthood to old age. I still remember the times when I would laugh at your misfortune. It disgusts me to know that I once saw you like that, she continued, closing her eyes before tilting her head forward, pressing her forehead against his chin. That's all in the past, he said softly, dipping forward to give her a kiss on top of her head. I can't even really remember my childhood, so you don't have to worry about me feeling sad about it, Kyumi. She hesitated, stopping when her voice got caught in her throat. Naruto slowly pulled back and looked at her. Kyumi, I still feel guilty. Think about it this way, Kyumi, he began, prompting her to open her eyes and look up at him. You always have time to become the person you want to be. Just because you did all those bad things in the past does not mean that you can't change and do good deeds from now on. You're right, she said in response. Half right, anyways. I'm going to be honest, Naruto, I only care about you. I really couldn't care about the other monkeys. If he were still the person he was back when had first ended up on the island, he would have been revolted by what she just said. Having spent several months with her now, hearing those words made him feel special and cherished, and loved. Being with her had definitely made him a bit more selfish. Kyumi. Naruto smiled at her before draping an arm over her waist. She smiled back at him. Knowing that you love me despite all that I have done to you. It helps calm my frantic heart. Then you look at me. And it starts beating fast again. I love you, he said simply. And when you say something like that? Kumiko blushed. Perhaps if my breasts were not so big, you would be able to feel my heart much more easily as it went pitter-pat in response to your words. Well, that may be true, but I kinda like how big your breasts are, he replied, looking away bashfully when she snorted at him. You men and your love for big breasts? I mean. Guilty? Kumiko giggled. You know, Naruto, I used to think my breasts as obscene. I'm really happy that you like them. Well, I like every part of you, Kumi, he said in response. Your breasts. Your face. Other parts. Every part. I like your parts too, she replied cheesily. Anyways, do you think we should get up? He hummed inquisitively. What's the rush? I guess there is none, said Kumiko, closing her eyes and letting out a soft sigh. Shall we sleep in? We shall. He smiled. She snuggled up against him and got comfortable. Good. With nothing left to say, for the time being at least, they both cuddled up against each other and relaxed. She had her face buried in his sturdy chest while he had his chin resting on the top of her head. In his arms, she felt protected, as if nothing could hurt her while he was embracing her. He felt the opposite, he was the protector and she was who he wanted to protect. While totally unintentional, they both ended up drifting back off to sleep and eventually woke up sometime later in the late afternoon. And even when they did wake up, they stayed glued to each other on their makeshift bed made of leaves for another hour before Naruto managed to convince Kumiko to unglue herself to him and get up. I am starving, he said finally as Kumiko lazily got out from their hut. She rubbed her eyes, her energy from before having seemingly disappeared because of those extra hours of sleep she had gotten. I could go for something as well. What would you like? Asked Naruto. Meat, she answered, letting out a soft groan as she stretched. I'd hunt, but this form is terrible at it. So, fish and fruits again? Kumiko shrugged. I guess. Don't you ever get sick of such little variety though, Naruto? I mean, I did eat ramen for nearly every meal when I was younger, he said, shrugging in kind. Right? She trailed off as she walked closer to him. Do you ever miss eating ramen? Sometimes, answered Naruto, offering her a smile as he reached up and gave her ear a quick scratch. I miss a lot of things. Her face scrunched up ever so slightly and her ear twitched at the stimulation. Do you now? Not as much as I used to, but yeah, he replied, trailing his hand down to cup her cheek. I've got you now though. I could not even imagine giving you up to go back, Kumi. She blushed. You and your words. Oh? You didn't find that too cheesy, he asked. Kumiko shook her head. No. Just the perfect amount of cheese. Heh. He let out a snort before he took her hand. So, fish? Fruit? Both. Definitely both. Both it is then. Breakfasts between them were perhaps the quietest moments in their lives together. It was a tradition that had formed by itself when they would just enjoy each other's company when they watched the sun rise together. That peaceful silence carried itself occasionally to breakfast. What they were eating today was pretty much what they had eaten every other day, some longans and apples, and a mix between raw and roasted fish. She preferred her fish raw while he had his roasted. They would occasionally take bites from the other's plate, knowing exactly when to and just how much to. They knew each other's limits and respected them, much to the delight of them both. Their small, yet wonderful, meal with each other ended when Kumiko slurped down the last piece of fish on her metaphorical plate. She was an enthusiastic eater much like him, except she made an even bigger show of it than he did. I wonder what you love more, Kumi, food or me? He asked, breaking the silence, offering her a smile as he watched her lick her fingers clean. You, of course, she answered, pouting softly. Why even ask? His smile grew a bit wider. I just wanted to hear your answer. What do you love more, ramen or me? Definitely you, Kumi, said Naruto in response, reaching over towards her to brush his fingers against her cheek. I'd take you over ramen any day of the week. Though having both wouldn't hurt. Kumiko let out an amused snort. Can you even remember what ramen tastes like? Kinda. He shrugged his shoulders. She hummed quietly, the corner of her lips slowly curving upwards into a smirk as a provocative question came to mind. Her smirk grew ever so slightly before she parted her lips. What tastes better, my dearest? Ramen or myself? Naruto blushed. Well. She smiled sweetly though flushed cheeks betrayed the calm and alluring facade that she was trying to put up. You taste sweet, he finally said. Kumiko lofted a brow. Sweet? Me. Very. You taste lewdly sweet, answered Naruto, his blush spreading to his ears as he nodded his head. Her blush deepened. Well, you taste interesting. Is that a bad thing? She shook her head. No, not at all. I really like. Let's just. Please change the topic for me, Naruto. he let out, amused at how his girlfriend's attempt at flirting ended up just making her embarrassed. Alright, cue me. What's a good topic? Kumiko watched as he placed a hand underneath his chin and struck a stereotypical thinking pose. It was such a Naruto thing to do that she nearly giggled. Some may have called him lame, but she thought that he looked very cool at the moment. At some point, she would have definitely thought the former though. Now, everything about him was endearing. He was kind of perfect like that, imperfect perfection. Her, on the other hand. Hey, Naruto. He quirked a brow at the sudden change in her tone. Yes, cue me. I still feel guilty. Do you now? Trailing off, Naruto moved to sit down next to her. Is it related to what we talked about earlier? Kumiko slowly nodded her head. Yeah. Let's talk about it then, he said, draping an arm over her shoulders. You can tell me more about what is bothering you. She parted her lips to speak, but then closed them when she realized that she did not have much to say. Perhaps looking back on this, she would find it funny how she had all these thoughts inside of her head and yet not a single word to say. Still, despite taking her sweet time, he continued to wait patiently, offering her a reassuring smile while giving her shoulder the occasional squeeze. It was only after about a minute that she realized that her heart was beating frantically. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath to calm herself before finally speaking. Love is so complicated, Naruto, she began, letting out a quiet sigh as she turned her head to look at him. You were so kind to me this morning, you reassured me as much as you could, and yet I still feel that I need to do something, anything, to atone for what I have done to you. Sometimes I think about whether it would be easier to just go back to being how I was, but then, I look over at you. And it becomes clear to me again that all these pains, these pangs of guilt that strike me from within, are worth it. Cue me. His gaze softened. They are worth it because I love you so much, Naruto. The corners of his lips curved upwards to form a warm smile on his face as he bent forward and pressed their foreheads together. I love you too, cue me. Am I enough though? I've taken so much away from you, your friends, your home, your dream. I've caused you so much pain. Am I worth it? She asked. He answered without any hesitation. Yes, Naruto. I think I know what you are trying to say, he said as he slowly pulled back. Even though it hurts, you continue to love me. Even when I hurt, I continue to love you, cue me. When I started having feelings for you, I was scared. I was scared about what that meant about me and how ending up on this island had changed me. But now, just knowing that you love me as much as I love you, is all I need and all I want, cue me, began Naruto as he slowly moved to wrap his arms around her. So, please do not ever think that you aren't enough or that you are not worth it. Her eyes had slowly widened over time as she listened to him speak and her bottom lip had begun to quiver as slight tears began to form on her eyelids. Perhaps they had been clumsy, but the meaning he had put into those words reached her all the same. Returning the hug, she closed her eyes and embraced him tightly. What did I ever do to deserve you, Naruto? She asked quietly. He gave her a soft squeeze. I could ask the same question. A happy tear slowly rolled down her cheek as she continued hugging him. His warmth seemed several times more soothing to her now that he had absolved her. The phantom remnants of the guilt that had riddled her just a few moments ago were still there, but she could feel them quickly fading away as they sat there in each other's arms in silence. If she had never just blurted out what she was feeling, she would have never been able to experience this. Somehow, magically, from close, they had gotten even closer. Where she saw no more room to go forward, came a leaping jump out of nowhere that propelled her forward further into his arms, his wonderful, sturdy arms. Melting against him, she turned his head, and nuzzled her cheek against his chest. I love you, Naruto. I love you too, cue me. She giggled at how quickly he had responded. Sorry for dragging our morning down with such a heavy conversation. No need to apologize. I'm happy that you trust me enough to tell me these things, replied Naruto as he reached a hand up to stroke her head. I'm happy. Just happy. He smiled before letting out a contented sigh. I am too, cue me. Chapter number 10, Climbing to the Peak. How did she convince him to do this again? Oh yeah. She had given him several sweet looks, some hugs, and a lot of kisses. She had also done other stuff, wonderfully lewd stuff, to get him to take this trip with her. See, he had been totally happy just hanging around their new spot with the fancy onsen and the wonderful leaf hut, but it seemed that she had suddenly developed an itch for adventure and needed him to help her scratch it. See, he would have been happy to scratch her itch if it had been the ordinary kind or the perverted kind, but not this kind. Perhaps all that lazing around had finally turned him into a slob, but all he really wanted to do was just relax with his girlfriend. Was that too much to ask for? He looked down at his aching feet as if he was expecting them to give him an answer. Obviously, he did not get one. They were just his feet after all. Just this poor, poor feet that were aching because of all the walking that he had done so far. Not only was he going for a walk, but it was a walk up the side of a mountain. From that comfortably cozy space in the jungle that they had created, they had gone through several kilometers of dense foliage and were just now making their way up a freaking mountain. Pressing his lips together, he let out a quiet grunt as he forced his leg up to hike up a slightly steep ledge. Seriously, was it just him or was it getting harder and harder each day to move like he did before? Pumping chakra into his legs was not just as effective as it used to be. It was, as Shikamaru might put it, troublesome. Tilting his head up, he saw Kumiko skipping along ahead of him. She was as lively as ever, even more lively than he was at the moment, and was humming to herself as she enjoyed the sun on her back and the slightly cooler mountain air flowing through her silky, orange hair. God, even from the back, she was pretty. To think that he was lucky enough to find a woman as beautiful and witty as her. Being with such a person meant that giving his all was just the minimum of what he could do to earn her favor, but he was fine with that, he loved her after all. Forcing himself to quickly hike up several rocky steps, he managed to catch up to her somewhat. Reaching forward, he tried to place his hand on her shoulder as she walked but missed. "Gah! My legs are numb," he said as he pulled his hand back to wipe some sweat off of his brow. She turned her head to look at him. "You alright, Naruto?" "Yeah. I'm just a bit tired," answered Naruto, offering her a smile. "It's been a very, very long time since I've had to move so much. I forget how you mortals need to keep moving to maintain your physique," commented Kumiko, slowing her pace long enough for him to fully catch up to her. "Still though, even through your shirt, I can see that you still have about the same amount of muscle as you did before." The way she trailed off caused him to quirk a brow. Sorry. I was just admiring," she replied, grinning at him foxily, causing him to blush when he realized what she meant. "I wonder if this is what you feel whenever you catch me staring at your chest or your rear end." His cheeks remained flushed as he spoke. She smiled. "No. Not anymore. Catching you staring at me like that just makes me feel happy. Happy? Maybe proud is a better word. Proud? Happy? Maybe I just like it when you look at me," said Kumiko in response, shrugging her shoulders as she offered her hand to him. Naruto smiled back at her as he took her hand, immediately squeezing once he had interlocked fingers with her. Her hand was so dainty that it sometimes felt as if he could break it if he was not careful. He knew that it was the opposite that was true though, Kumiko could destroy him with her pinky finger if she wanted to. Thankfully, she did not. "So, does that mean I should look at you even more?" he asked, turning his head to look at her. "You should do a lot of things to me more," she answered cheekily with a wink, nudging his side a bit with her elbow. "Maybe you should also try a few new things with me as well." He felt his cheeks slowly start to heat up again. "Huh? Like what, Kumi?" Now it was her turn to blush. What she had said was supposed to make his face go red and for him to go adorably quiet though. She had not planned for him to ask her a question back at all, which was kind of a faux pas on her part because what she had asked would have definitely garnered a response from him. Now, as she walked in silence, she could feel as the power between them shifted away from her towards him. Oh, how the tables had turned. She trailed off as her blush slowly spread to the sides of her face. You mean? Naruto grinned as he nudged her back. She pouted. "You know what I mean, darling. Don't make me say it. I still have some bits of modesty that I wish to keep intact." He hummed softly, his grin widening slightly as he caught on to her use of the word darling to win him over. It did, before letting out a soft sigh. "All right, cue me. I won't make you say it." "You won't?" "Well, now that you say that, I kind of want to," he replied. "And I think you want to tell me too." Kumiko bit down gently onto her plump, bottom lip before slowly nodding. "Somewhat. I have a feeling that what you are about to say will be lewd." She nodded again. "Why yes. I wonder what people would think if they knew that I was able to make the legendary nine-tailed fox stammer," he mused, deciding to change the topic for her. "I'd be ruined," said Kumiko, puffing her cheeks at him. "But, I wouldn't mind." "Oh?" He quirked a brow. Kumiko shrugged her shoulders. "Why should I care about what monkeys think of me? I could kill them all with just my pinky finger if I wanted to." "Ha! The only monkey whose opinion that I care about is yours, Naruto," she stated firmly as she gave his hand a squeeze. He could not stop himself from smiling when he heard her say that. "That's really sweet. If you think about it, you're kind of a race traitor, betraying your fellow monkeys to be with me," commented Kumiko, canting her head a bit to look up at him. "Well, if you think about it, I'm pretty much a hero since I managed to conquer the nine-tailed fox when so many others have failed," he said in response. "Pshhh," she let out, smirking at him. "The only thing you've conquered so far is my heart. My body remains unconquered for the most part." "For the most part?" Kumiko's cheeks turned a cute shade of pink as she blushed. Maybe after we finish this trip up the mountain, Naruto. Once we get to the top or after we get back down? He asked bluntly, causing her blush to deepen. And maybe we can discuss it after? Naruto let out a contented sigh before bumping shoulders with her. We can wait as long as we want until we talk about things like that, Kumi. You don't have to worry about me wanting you to push yourself. But I want to. Trailing off, she looked up into his eyes. They widened just as she looked into them. Oh. Don't you? She asked gently. His cheeks flushed. Well, of course. Well, I can tell that we both feel a bit nervous about it. It is funny how we already do all these lewd things to each other and yet sex is the one topic we're so nervous about, she commented, smirking despite also blushing at the same time. Right, Naruto? You'd think it'd be something else, but I'm fine with this, replied Naruto, smiling in response to her smirk. I think it's natural, you know? Couples can go at any pace they want and as long as things work out, then it's all good. That makes a lot of sense. She leaned against him as they walked. For someone with as little experience with these sorts of things as I do, you are so much wiser about it. Naruto glanced down at her when he felt her rest her cheek on his shoulder. Well, I mean, I must be amazing at this relationship stuff. I did get you to become my girlfriend after all. Huh. Yeah. True, said Kumiko in response before letting out a soft chuckle. Man, you know, this talk was helping me a bit earlier, but now I just can't think about anything else besides how sore my legs are, he admitted, letting out a grunt as he took a particularly long stride to stretch himself out a bit. I can give you a piggyback ride, she replied as she glanced up at him. He blinked. Wouldn't that be a bit awkward? Not as awkward as you complaining about the limitations of your monkey legs, she smirked. See, now I just feel like I should complain even more now, said Naruto in response, giving her a soft nudge. Kumiko let out an amused snort. What? Don't like the idea of being carried around by a woman? Well, I mean. And no. It's not like that, he sputtered as his cheeks flushed, causing her to let out a giggle. I'm only teasing you, Naruto. He pouted. Well then. I love it when you get embarrassed, my dear. It really brings out the blue in your eyes and the yellow of your hair when bits of red are mixed in. Kumiko grinned foxily at him. So kinda like how I like it when your skin turns slightly red whenever I spank you. Her eyes widened and she quickly blushed. And Naruto. Ha, he let out, the corners of his lips curving upwards to form a toothsome smile after he snorted. The tides have turned, Kumi. It seems you're the one blushing now. Yeah, but unlike you, I managed to get you to blush without mentioning. Spanking? Kumiko puffed out her cheeks and furrowed her brow at him. Humph. Alright. Low blow, conceded Naruto, giving her an apologetic smile as he reached over and gave her a gentle pat on the head. Sorry. You're going to have to do better than that, darling, she said, keeping her cheeks puffed. I want more than just your word. I want action as well. When we get back, I want you to give me a massage. Alright? And I want you to take a bath with me. Sure. And an hour of belly rubs. Wah. Also, she blushed. I want you to do that thing again. You know? With your tongue? Naruto slowly nodded his head. Yeah? Alright. Seems fair. Hopefully I don't immediately collapse after getting back. You won't. You're stronger than that, my dearest, replied Kumiko. If you say so? She gave him a little nudge. I know so. Heh. The corners of his lips curved upwards to form a small smile on his face after she said that. Feeling some of his energy return to him, he decided that maybe walking up the side of a mountain would not be that bad. With good company, the fresh air, and the beautiful view, both the jungle below and Kumiko beside him, to keep him entertained, he could definitely make it. He actually did manage to make it eventually. Tired, exhausted, and on the verge of being broken, he took the last step up and finally arrived at the peak of the mountain. His legs were numb and so was his arm because Kumiko had to hold onto him tightly during the last couple of minutes to keep him steady lest he accidentally collapse and fall to his death. While he pretty much hated every step he took to get there, he was happy at the fact that he had made it. It seemed that Kumiko was happy too because the moment he flopped onto the ground, she began clapping. Bravo, Naruto. You made it, she said, giggling quietly at her boyfriend's exhausted state. Naruto merely grunted in response. You know, you look really unsightly right now with your butt in the air like that, commented Kumiko as she walked over to him and prodded him on the rear with her finger. Too tired. Too tired to care, he replied quietly. Come on, darling. I am sure that you have a bit more energy to spare, she said softly as she squatted down next to him. He let out a groan. Ugh. Maybe. No maybes. Kumiko pouted as she slid both of her arms underneath him in an attempt to roll him over. You have already made it this far. Reach deep inside you for whatever energy you have left and enjoy the view with me. Is it really that good? He asked, grunting quietly as he was rolled onto his back. It is. Closing his eyes, he took a deep, much-needed breath before slowly getting up. Grunting once again, this time because of the soreness that had set into his legs, he then opened his eyes and looked around. Indeed, the view was quite beautiful. Though, as he took in the wonderfully misty clouds around him along with the bits of green and some of the vibrant colors from the jungle that managed to peek through, he ended up just staring at Kumiko. Ah, yes. You're right. The view is really good, he said, offering her a smile. She pouted at him. All you ever do is look at me. That's because you're the best-looking thing on the island, he said in response, his smile widening when he saw Kumiko's cheeks flush. You, me. Kumiko gave him a playful smack on the chest. You and your sweet words. Sweeter than apples with honey is how you are, Naruto. Only when I'm around you, Kumi. He smacked her back on the shoulder. We both know that is not true, she said as she sat down next to him and placed her head on his shoulder. It wasn't me that made you the kind person that you are, Naruto. He was quick to wrap an arm around her despite how tired he was. Well, I can thank you for at least keeping me kind. I think if I were alone on this island, I'd go crazy or something. I forget how susceptible your kind is to isolation, replied Kumiko, placing one of her hands onto his lap. I guess I am now too. I would not be able to survive long with your company, my dearest. I'm sure you're strong enough to get by on your own without me. She shook her head. No, not at all. Without you. I do not even want to think about going on without you. Kumi, I love you more than life itself, Naruto. Trailing off, she slowly shifted to face him before embracing him. Naruto returned the embrace, placing one hand on the back of her head while keeping the other one on her upper back. I love you too, Kumi. Naruto. I know that you cannot help but think about the future, but, well, focus on the present. For me, alright? I want you to enjoy the time we have together as much as possible, he said softly as he gave her a firm, loving squeeze, seemingly aware of her worries. She hesitated. You're right, Naruto. I'll try my best to love you as much as I can. Right now, when I still have you. Naruto slowly pulled back so that he could look at her face and into her eyes. I can see why you wanted to get me to come all the way up here with you. It is a very romantic place, all the way up here in the middle of the island. If you think about it, we're so close to the sky that it is almost like we're both in heaven. We are in heaven, she corrected, offering him a warm smile. At least I am. Are you? I am. He smiled back before he pressed a quick kiss to her lips. Kumiko whined softly when he separated from her, expecting the kiss to be much deeper. Clasping her hands behind his neck, she pulled him in against her and kissed him the way that she had wanted him to kiss her. Deeply, lovingly, and passionately, that was how she wanted all kisses between them to be like. His hand settled onto her wide hips as she continued to kiss him. She moaned quietly into his mouth when he squeezed them. It seemed at first that he was going to be able to nab control, but he melted before she did, much to her delight. It was not often that she could get him to give in first, which made this moment extra special to her. Eventually, she pulled back. Slowly and gently, she slowly parted from him, licking her lips immediately after doing so, tasting the small strands of saliva that he had left on them while they were kissing. Looking back at him, she let out a soft chuckle when he saw how his blue eyes were glazed over as if he was so taken aback by her kiss that he needed a moment to collect himself. Maybe it's just me, but I think kissing on top of a mountain is much more interesting than kissing in the middle of some jungle. He slowly nodded his head. Definitely. Though, she canted her head. How are we supposed to get down? Kumiko blinked. Well, my legs are numb. And, it's getting dark. I give you such a wonderful kiss and the only thing on your mind is how numb your legs are? He blushed. Well, she gave him a purposefully light shove. Way to ruin the moment, Naruto.